Originally devised as a spiritual successor to Capcom's horror-themed mansion exploration game Sweet Home, and eventually released as a shameless clone of Alone in the Dark, the original Resident Evil began a series that includes some of the greatest and most embarrassingly bad horror games of all time. In the first part of this retrospective series, we will skip the countless side games, remakes, and god-awful live-action films in order to review the first 6 numbered Resident Evil games. Part 1, Resident Evil 1, released in 1996. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be the last normal person in a world full of retarded people? Aside from moving to Canada, playing Resident Evil 1 for the PlayStation 1 is probably your best bet for capturing that feel. Resident Evil has a true B-movie aesthetic, though in this case, the B stands for buttocks. At times, Resident Evil feels like a polygonal Tommy Wiseau film due to the English script being written by people who had zero understanding of the English language.
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things.
As opposed to what, Barry? Bookmarks and hubcaps? Barry should have just said that the rounds would be more effective against live enemies like hunters and spiders than against reanimated abominations like zombie dogs and Hillary Clinton. Unfortunately, every character in this game talks like a knockoff Christopher Walken due to the voice actors Capcom scrounged up from the set of a softcore porn shoot, neglecting to inform Capcom just how jilted and poorly written their lines were. That isn't to say Resident Evil is a failure. Everyone who's played it will recall the "oh shit" moments that occurred the first time they encountered a shambling corpse, undead Rottweiler, or weaponized Pepe the Frog. And while you push in more musty boxes than an elderly butch lesbian while playing Resident Evil, the non-box based puzzles were memorable and followed a certain logic. For example, when you reach the dead end caused by this flooded path, you'll get a close-up of Jill's ass. Logically speaking, the most sensible move at that point is to crank one out in order to release the fluid. Speaking of Jill, this genuine Frankenstein Valentine props up more pricks than porcupines and is the video game embodiment of female privilege. And I'm not just saying that because I want to come in a sock and slap her with it. Selecting Jill is the equivalent of playing on easy. Due to being a woman, Jill has extra spaces to store any items that she doesn't mind causing to smell like fish. Despite resembling a homeless Steven Seagal impersonator who just ate an entire fried chicken with his bare hands, Jill support character Barry is reliable and constantly bails Jill out of trouble. And like that one uncle you haven't heard of since he gave you a sip of Jesus juice and you had to sleep on your stomach for a month, he always has something special for you to fish out of his front pants pocket. Jill also constantly trips over gigantic piles of ammo. This is especially noticeable since ammo is so scarce for Chris that you'll wind up counting bullets like a Jewish hitman as a result. It also doesn't help that Chris's support character is a 15-year-old girl who wears her Wonder Bra on the outside. Rebecca is the sole survivor of Bravo Team, otherwise known as the Tard Squad. This birth defect brigade included such monumental fuck-ups as Forrest, who was pecked to death by a 1-pound bird while standing 10 paces from an unlocked door while equipped with a fully loaded bazooka, Kenneth, who died to the zombie from the tutorial, and Enrico, who was apparently some kind of grimy Mexican. When Rebecca isn't busy struggling to read her lines or having her head ripped off by hunters, she does her best to turn Chris's campaign into a dating sim between a man who would later be rewritten as a nutsack aficionado and a retard whose eggs are dropping like Michael J. Fox at Easter. Which is good, because unlike certain other Resident Evil games, this version of Chris doesn't go limp when in the red, if you know what I mean.
I'm talking about that clammy pussy that's probably full of Legos and SpaghettiO.
While I can get why people assume Chris is gay in later games, in this initial Resident Evil, he is obviously not. To get the best ending, Chris saves the only 2 people in the mansion who have gashes that bleed, and leaves Barry to rot. Even Wesker, the asexual king of the beta males, blasts a load on a teenage girl's tits, though this later backfires and he is hoisted by his own retard. Mechanically speaking, Resident Evil is less dated than you'd think. While sequels to and re-releases of Resident Evil include the ability to quick turn, strafe, auto-aim, and move while shooting, this initial game forced players to plan their movements carefully. Though Resident Evil had the least amount of monsters per area in the series, it also has the least amount of room to navigate around those abominations, forcing the player into tense confrontations. Atmospheric music, sound effects, and dramatic camera angles build the tension, though the fixed camera will occasionally feed you directly to your enemies, like some kind of digitized version of the German government. The tank controls work fine, save for when you want to turn while running. Then Chris and Jill move like Barry shambling to the toilet after eating an entire box of Hot Pockets, so you'll need to pull out a compass and plan that shit out in advance. Limited saves and non-regenerating health make optimizing your routes essential, and few players will finish the game without memorizing the locations of every magical chest. And no, I'm not talking about the one in Jill's shirt. In terms of the story, I would like to take this opportunity to point out the unending stupidity of Umbrella, the company behind the events of Resident Evil. Their top researchers locked their computers with 3-letter passwords named after their girlfriends, and their greatest weapon could be killed by anyone with the foresight to poke its gigantic exposed heart with a stick. Generally speaking, the less games in this franchise attempted to include or explain the actions of Umbrella, the better they turned out as a result. Resident Evil was, and continues to be at its best, when it focuses on a single set of characters in their particular circumstances, rather than an overarching story or connecting the various games. While Resident Evil 1 was an incredibly important moment in gaming history, the spin-offs and sequels that followed are a mixed bag of fun action and survival horror games, as well as some inexcusable turds. I used to believe that the godless Chinese rice herders who bombed our towers at Pearl Harbor created Resident Evil 0 in the shape of a Resident Evil game, much in the same way that carefully gyrating your hips while evacuating your latest batch of bioorganically processed Lunchables from your pearly pink pavilion of poo in a perfect circle creates something in the shape of a delicious and moist chocolate donut that is in reality composed entirely of shit. Generally speaking, there are two types of Resident Evil games: groundbreaking masterpieces that change the way horror games are made, and failures so monumental that Democrats would elect them as the first female president if not for those pesky voter ID laws. Resident Evil 0 is the origin story no one asked for that answers none of the questions posed by earlier games, creates further plot holes, and comes off as fan fiction written by someone who wasn't actually a fan of Resident Evil. I can only assume it was created by mistake when a producer at Capcom mentioned that he'd like to run a train on Rebecca Chambers, and the developmental team misunderstood him. It's either that, or the even less sensible scenario that someone at Capcom actually thought building a game around the revenge plot of an opera-singing, flying transsexual leech man who vomits up disembodied Hillary Clinton vaginas and eventually evolves into a pile of angry asparagus was a good idea. While Zero was developed at the same time as the awe-inspiring remake, which distilled the essence of the original trilogy to its nearest perfect form, Resident Evil 0 seems to have absorbed all the bad ideas from that shared development cycle in utero, like my twin brother Beppo, who hogged all those delicious extra chromosomes Mama inherited from her older brother, shielded me with his body every time Daddy tried to sneak a gut shot at Mom while she was drinking, and currently resides in a jar in my mama's basement alongside the apricot jam and pickled pig's feet. And speaking of fat-tongued familial burdens, let me take a moment to discuss not only the difference in characterization of Rebecca Chambers during her time as a protagonist in Resident Evil 0 and supporting character in Remake, but also how the discrepancies in her characterization create plot holes so massive I could almost fit my dingus and tremendous sweaty yam bag into them. In both games, it is established that Rebecca Chambers is the 18-year-old bulletproof training bra wearing cum sleeve for a group of highly trained special police who all instantly die in the opening cutscene because one of the zombies was black and they didn't want to start a riot by shooting it. In Remake, Rebecca serves well in her support role, healing Chris after boss fights, expanding the lore with her dialogue, and giving me something to pull my pecker to while playing Chris's campaign, other than my own sultry reflection on the monitor during load screen. In Zero, Rebecca only serves to make you waste healing items if you bring her along, or waste time backtracking to pick her up after leaving her behind until reaching the next door that requires 2 people to open for no good reason. Rebecca has so little health that you could kill her with a pillow, and judging from her lifeless eyes and self-barbered with safety scissors Dora the Explorer haircut, someone attempted to do just that once while she was very young, but was only able to hold the pillow on her face just long enough to kill some non-essential brain cells and blow a load in his pants. And to be fair, whom among us can claim to have never done the same? Like my penis while browsing 4chan, Rebecca's competency rises and falls without warning. At one moment, she's an ace medic who was well versed in the skills needed to explode a secret underground bioweapon laboratory full of monstrosities so hideous you'd expect them to be the top followed artists on Tumblr. In the next moment, she's a blithering imbecile who doesn't have the upper body strength needed to pull herself up onto a ledge, but can somehow still use a walkie-talkie while hanging onto that ledge with both hands. After witnessing firsthand Umbrella's involvement in the zombie outbreak, she makes no attempt to contact her superiors, completely forgets how to defend herself from the same frog monsters she was literally kicking in the balls one game earlier, and stares at a fucking shelf, pretending not to know exactly what's going on, like Jerry Sandusky's wife during an especially jubilant basement sleepover. Most players wondered what happened to Rebecca following the events of the original game, and after playing Resident Evil Zero, I can only assume she was committed to some sort of group home for girls too vapid to know when they're being fondled, yet not so ugly that you wouldn't bother. It also doesn't help that the other protagonist of Zero also disappears from history following the game, which is likely due to him being a blatant Charlie Sheen clone. Billy Cohen's face, haircut, and backstory are lifted from Sheen's role in the film Platoon, and Billy is even implied to have an immunity to the T-virus due to the tiger blood running through his veins, which, as we all know now from post-mortem examinations of Corey Haim's butthole, is a euphemism for blood completely devoid of functioning white blood cells. William Bergen and Albert Wesker also appear in cutscenes that have no impact on the protagonist or the overall story. For no particular reason, this version of Birkin is a grimy Mexican whose head appears to have been carved from a kidney, and Wesker's jaw is so stationary that it looks like he just sucked a lemon every time he phones in his lines. While the original PlayStation games weren't exactly known for the high quality of their writing, the remake of the original game has so much love and care put into rewriting the dialogue and lore that it set a new benchmark for the franchise. Perhaps it was for nostalgia's sake that when characters open their mouths in Zero, absolute gibberish falls out. At no point will you understand what the fuck is happening aside from the basic plot of a Fabio clone comprised entirely of black mints, Calpers Caviar is so furious at Umbrella for killing him that one time that he wants to destroy the world. While most of the gameplay in Zero is passable, save for the terrible inventory system that will cause you to completely restart the game every time you forget to bring the goddamn hookshot along. Every time Stacy Keach, the lazy leech, shows up, you'll want to turn the game off and find something better to do with your time. Leechman lacks an empathetic backstory, practicality as a bioweapon, and even the slightest thematic connection to the plot. If anything, the only metaphorical connection to leeches in Resident Evil Zero is its ability to leech away 3 hours of your life and your will to continue living. In Remake, Lisa Trevor is patient zero for the G-virus, and her tragic backstory is intertwined with that of Umbrella, her father, who designed the Labyrinthian mansion, and her mother, who knows exactly when to give a little head. As the world's greatest example of weaponized adult-onset Down syndrome, Lisa was intended to crash global economies and starve Jews to death by breaking enemy lines and devouring all of their succulent pennies. On the other hand, Blood-sucking Mangina Man shows up once per act on the other side of a monitor that the protagonists have no access to, and tries so hard to appear threatening that he comes off as a complete spaz instead. I don't know about you, you wonderful, beautiful viewer, but I have never been so furious at a girl that I flung monkeys at her. But then again, I'm not Brazilian, so that was never really an option to begin with. Enemy design is also a major problem in Zero. In Remake, the primary new addition to the formula are the Crimson Head zombies that evolve from regular zombies that you dispatch without decapitating or immolating. They serve as a bridge between regular zombies and hunters, and make even cleared areas butthole-clenchingly dangerous. In Zero, zombies die no problem, and are later replaced by albino Kevin Hart-sized monklets that don't fling poo at you because their design is so shitty they fling themselves at you from off screen instead. Almost all the non-humanoid enemies in Zero are just upscaled animals that grab you by the pussy and die after a couple of hits. The giant snake in Remake begins to rot as the game progresses. The gigantic plant is so meaty that it's practically vagina plantata, and even the large zombie sharks have battle damage from eating each other. The big bugs, Bat, and Frog Zero just seem silly by comparison. Now don't get me wrong, the Stretch Armstrong monsters will fuck your shit up if you're out of fire weapons, and the HD port of Zero has just enough tweaks and rebalances to make the game playable. If you like Resident Evil and are open to laughing at the bad writing, it's worth the $5 it'll cost you during the next Steam sale. And besides, there are plenty of even worse Resident Evil games out there. Well, that's all for today's video. If you liked it, you can subscribe, tweet about it, check out one of my other Resident Evil reviews, check out my novels, ebooks, and audiobooks using the link provided in the description, or save me a smooch for Under the Mistletoe this Christmas. Until then, thanks for your time and goodbye! Part 2, Resident Evil 2, released in 1998. Resident Evil 2 was released 1 week after President Bill Clinton released his presidential prostate pudding all over a walking, talking, walk-in humidor horse gooped up dress. And having something bloody, violent, and wholesome on the television was a nice change of pace. In Resident Evil 2, you can play as a glorified bullseye for cum with an ass so fat it's no wonder the zombies started mutating into lickers. During her quest to locate her missing brother and bring his flaming, Jill's sweet, delectable, molestable, buttocks-ignoring, diary-keeping, behind-to-gay conversion therapy camp, Claire is so immaculately kawaii that even as a precious little boy, I wanted to plop my disgusting, rotten honeydew melon-sized testicles over the bridge of her nose so that my taint-tinted sack of salty liquid snacks could butterfly kiss her luscious eyelashes. Then I'd start furiously jazzercising in place, causing rivulets of sweat to trickle into her beautiful blue eyes from my brown eye and intermingle with her tears as she begs for me to stop. Then flip her over and shoot so much cream inside that Claire would become an eclair, because she is just that kawaii. Or you can play as an overgrown Chucky doll with Asperger's who is on a quest to sniff the bowl cut of a ladyboy who only owns one dress. Seriously, every time we see Ada Wong in a Resident Evil game, she's wearing the same filthy dress. Unless she carpet bombs her bush each night with Febreze, her sideways cooter probably smells like egg rolls and buttholes. Not that Leon could pull any better at this point. Before he was given the personality of Ash from Evil Dead in Resident Evil 4, Leon was an all-denim wearing spaz who shot a bitch in the head on his first day as a cop just because she grabbed his foot. He didn't know she was a zombie yet and sent her down to Michael Brown Town without a second thought. Every time Leon opens his mouth, stupid falls out of it. As much as he's after Ada's briny Chinese heinies, whenever they're together, Leon scolds Ada like he's her dad, when at best, he's more like a creepy uncle that always wants her to fish pieces of hard candy out of his front pants pocket. The original Resident Evil plagiarized Alone in the Dark setting and controls, but improved the god-awful interface so much that no one really seemed to mind. Resident Evil 2 moved the action to an urban setting and doubled down on the number of enemies encountered at a time. Unfortunately, the protagonist turns slower than a breech birth, and the dramatic camera angles will occasionally feed you directly to enemies. To make up for this, while zombie cops don't drop ammunition, donuts, or happy tweets from black people when killed, you will find ammo and healing items in almost every single room. And to be perfectly honest, if I wanted to be gang stalked by moaning white people in an enclosed place while tripping over free shit, I'd just pull out my dick during a community college feminist literature class again. While you can run past most enemies, there's no reason to hoard the higher power ammunition. Most areas are minuscule, and you'll spend more time loading door cutscenes than your weapons. The general layout of Resident Evil 2 lacks cohesion. While the mansion, residence, and labs of the original game included kitchens and bedrooms and bathrooms that felt lived in and logically functional, the police station layout of Resident Evil 2 is completely retarded. I get that Asians usually commit ritualistic suicide by pulling Chinese finger traps over their heads rather than going to jail, but when playing Resident Evil 2, you'll wonder if the Japanese developers even understand the purpose of a police station. You have to pass through dozens of rooms and hallways to reach the holding cells. There isn't a single bathroom in the entire building, and you need gems earned from pushing boxes around to open doors. Can I just state that I hate box pushing puzzles? You can figure out the solution instantly, but following through takes forever and the payoff stinks. I would rather push a block of shit out of a Minecraft guy's ass and into my mouth. Resident Evil 2 improved on the first game's dual character mechanic by having some of the choices made by the first character affect the next scenario played. For example, if you use the poison gas to kill these monster trees as Leon, they'll respawn stronger and shoot poison goo at Claire, as we all would like to. If you claim these items for one character, they won't be available for the next, and if you fill a goldfish bowl with loads while playing as Claire, you'll be too sleepy and dehydrated to bother playing through again as Leon. The second scenario includes the occasional visit from Mr. X, who moves from room to room like the Kool-Aid Man and gets taken down faster than any new Twitter account I attempt to create. Third and fourth scenarios are also included that alternate who takes which path and how those paths unfold, but the core gameplay is unaffected, and you'll already know how to solve every single puzzle at that point. Other modes include Extreme Battle Mode and Force Survivor, both of which task you with running from one section of the main game to another as fast as possible. These modes are fun for a couple of hours, but are primarily notable for how annoying they can be to unlock depending on which version of the game you own, and the fact that the last character you unlocked is a tampon that gets bloodier with each attack he takes. Overall, Resident Evil 2 isn't as great as when it was new, but it's still worth a playthrough for anyone who enjoys old-school survival horror games, or anyone who wants to whine like a petulant child about how the incoming remake isn't exactly the same. Well, hey everybody, it's your good old pal EmptyHero, and today we're just gonna turn back the way we came real quick. No big deal. In this, Resident Evil 2 is Dark and Hell is Hot edition, also known in certain niche circles as the most anticipated remake of a beloved 90s franchise since Rick Moranis returned from his decades-long retirement on cocaine in Whores Island to star in the film Honey, I Molested the Kids. Players reunite with such beloved characters as this prepubescent David Bowie impersonator, live-action role-playing as a cop, this frog-eyed mouth breather who looks like she should be sprinkling Lembath on Ada's shirt while she sleeps so that Leon won't take her all the way to Mount Doom, this Miss Exposition who wants you to stop and listen to her bitchin', but wouldn't be in this position if she made it her mission to make her husband's penis glisten with some kissin', or at least take the occasional fistin'. This classic comic relief in the form of a bumbling pedophile who wants his young ward to chill out long enough for him to check the internal temperature of this corpse with his inadequate fat man's schlong. This godless slant-eye, whose cover as an FBI agent should have been blown the moment she interacted with a person named Kennedy without assassinating them at the behest of the globalist banker elite. And finally, this pint-sized sociopath whom no one loves and will spend the next 10 years locked up in an asylum for thoughts and training because frankly, Sherry grows up to be a poor man's Ashley Graham, and without that prodigious pair of presidential pectoral pudding packs and ears as big as the loads she deserves, this cause of her own parents' divorce earns a quadruple "no way fag" from me. This remarkably refined remake reimagines the more retarded aspects of the original game, including making the police department more OSHA compliant and slightly less like an elaborate Rube Goldberg machine, which requires the contents of an Italian grandmother's curio cabinet to traverse, though you can still open the way to a secret basement using 3 ashtrays that literally anyone could have collected due to the locking mechanisms that bind them having a whopping 27 possible combinations. And the chess piece locks in the extra secret sub-basement could just as easily have been solved by advancing your pawn to the other player's side of the board in order to swap it out with your desired piece, but I digress. The original game's tank controls, which flummoxed so many generations of Californian trust fund baby game reviewers whose parents spent hundreds of thousands to educate but still write at a 4th grade level, are gone. In their place, players will utilize sensible 3D controls that allow the occasional shot while moving, but improve accuracy while standing still and provide the player with just enough mobility to balance the risks and rewards of brushing past enemies like a white person just trying to get to work during one of those Black Lives Matter protests that erupt whenever a poor defenseless young knight of Nubian nobility gets shot while innocently trying to help a friend scratch his head by rapidly pressing it against the sidewalk with his shoe. You might pass through unscathed, you might catch a bike lock to the chin. It's really a matter of how close you are willing to approach a mindless abomination that only knows how to consume and destroy its surroundings. You know, in the game.
You can't see it, but I just winked, baby.
Zombies now operate on near Return of the Living Dead rules and can survive multiple hot bullet bukakes before finally running out of steam, and their bodies never disappear. This causes players to treat downed enemies like an old family dog, and every time it lies down, you have to wonder whether it's dead or just sleeping. Just when you think you have things under control, that one zombie you kicked in the dick an hour ago pops up from around a corner and feasts on the strips of London broil inexplicably stored in your neck. Dogs appear more sparingly than in the original game and retain their ability to give your hot-to-trot thought a knot whether she wants it or not when the G-Virus infects a Mr. Magoo. A near completely harmless licker is born. You can walk past these half-crippled Carnage knockoffs as confidently as you would a Salvation Army Santa after a hurricane in Honduras, and they'll only ever attack you if you're forced to sprint to avoid a secondary threat. This, of course, brings us to our most arbitrary adversary who will fuck your glutes loose like a juiced gooseberry. Mr. X. His dogs bite, scratch, shake, and hold all night, so when you hear that stomp, stomp, start running, cause when you hear that stomp, stomp, he's coming. The face of this impractical, implacable smacker of attackable snatches that smell like mackerel was apparently smooshed in with a thumb in utero, much as my own son's was, due to him hiding so far back in the womb that my full fist couldn't quite squish him like a bug, and thus why he survives to this day, turning the wheel of pain that generates the power for the Christmas lights and vibrating beds of my secret basement. This pleather-festooned smasher of poon functions as a sort of get-good switch that forces the players to navigate previously explored areas as fast as humanly possible, while avoiding any enemies they neglected to re-un-not-dead-to-death undeadify the first couple of times around. You can only stun Mr. X momentarily, and often you'll escape from his clutches as a better player than when the chase began. William Birkin also appears in various stages of opening his third eye and, well, 4th, 5th, and 27th eye, but frankly, he's primarily relegated to scripted boss encounters, so we'll get to him later. Subtle gameplay tweaks like forcing the player to manually toss out worthless items, an ammo crafting system lifted from Resident Evil 3, and hiding more fanny packs around the map than the aftermath of an explosion at a rollerblading pedophiles convention help to balance out the new mechanics with the old layout. Some players will grumble about the lack of a dodge or blocking mechanic, but frankly, being able to dance around enemies would have left this game about as tense as Christopher Reeve's dick. While the events of this remake are more or less the same as its predecessor, the presentation is different enough to warrant picking apart. After blatantly plagiarizing the opening of Silent Hill Origins for about a minute, our protagonist feels some steaming hot 4 chalupas and 2 cups of coffee shit the brewin' and converge on an unsuspecting Quickie Mart bathroom. Unfortunately, the facilities are about as out of service as the employees and clientele, and Leon misses out on a perfect opportunity to loose the juice from his penis by forcing Claire to blow him while he shoots some Zeds over her heads. Then, instead of turning back the way they came to get some help, these blithering retards drive further into town. One whiff of a slant-eyed inner thigh on the wind later, and Leon leverages some trucker's German Christmas market-styled parking job and an otherwise easy-to-scale chain-link fence in order to ditch Claire as soon as possible. Within the confines of the Raccoon City Police Department, our star-crossed lovers of leaving the only black man in the game to die, instead of just giving him a first aid spray or at least some butter to rub on his injuries, will scrounge around for keys and quest flags just long enough to learn the basic layout so they can be chased by Mr. X back the way they came. The station remains pretty faithful to the original game, with new additions that keep the experience fresher than a newborn baby's first bean burrito brep. After a sudden showdown with Birkin in the basement, who's furious over his original G-Virus, Do Not Steal, being stolen, and also putting forth the most effort I've had to for getting boxed since high school, the protagonist's path will momentarily diverge. Chief Irons kicks Claire directly in the ovaries, knowing full well she'll never use them, then forces Sherry to escape an orphanage that Umbrella used to literally feed children to zombies by giving him a bit of the old traditional Muslim bukkake, all because Sherry refused to just give him her pendant due to the words of her mother ringing in her ears. "Sherry, this pendant was on your daddy's neck when he was shot down over Hanoi. He was captured, put in a Vietnamese prison camp. He knew if the gooks ever saw the pendant, it'd be confiscated. The way your dad looked at it, that pendant was your birthright. He'd be damned if any slopes were gonna put their greasy yellow hands on it, so he hid it in the one place he knew that he could hide something, his ass. 5 long years, he wore this pendant up his ass. Then he paused his own neg hole after getting shot and gave the pendant to me. I hid this uncomfortable hunk of metal up my barren womb, which you poisoned with your autism in utero, for 2 years. Then, after 7 long years, I was sent home to my family, and now, little Sherry, I give this pendant to you." Meanwhile, Leon explores the revamped prison area where Mr. X does his best impression of the Kool-Aid Man, combined with President God King Donald Trump's most intimate fantasies, by bursting through a brick wall while screaming, "Oh yeah!" and popping some pencil-necked journalist dweeb's head like a grape for publishing one too many instances of fake news. Leon then teams up with Ada to sidestep a guy whom is rapidly succumbing to the Kurt Cobain virus, sprint past the dreaded inferior autoscroller alligator who bites a fat pipe and explodes now not later, play musical chairs with a bullet, utilize Ada's stereotypically Asian obsession with cameras and stealing American trade secrets to circumvent the horrific genocide of 6 million Adas, which we must never forget, then pull a rod out of Ada's leg, and also Leon's pants, and engage in the fanciful exchange of, "Leon, I'm counting on you. What am I, an abacus, you slut?" In the sewers, Leon and Claire will tackle such arduous challenges as learning the blind spots of the G-mutants so that they can just swoosh right past them every time, wading neck deep in Raccoon City's entire supply of liquid shit, trying not to turn off the game in disgust after realizing that William Birkin implanted the G-Virus in his own daughter off-screen, smacking Birkin with a crate as punishment for implanting his own daughter with the G-Virus off-screen, and acquiring the MacGuffin needed to advance to the next area. Once in the labs, both characters will fight off an onslaught of anthropomorphized tossed salads that walk around with their disgusting balls exposed, as I do from time to time in order to even out the liver spots with the tan, while Claire will dump off Sherry in the designated office fuckbed and head off in search of an antivirus, in a display of rampant sexism, as I think an Uncle Virus would have been just as effective, and Leon will be played by Ada like a damned fiddle and procure a sample of the virus for her, despite enough spelling out for him why he shouldn't, and Ada also being too stupid to just rip a hunk of meat off of an infected zombie and use that for a sample instead. Both protagonists will face off against an even more deformed version of Birkin, who's furious from being shot in the nuts with icy hot by his cunt of a wife after she screamed, "Maybe we could save our marriage if some of us weren't transforming into monsters with big, meaty claws," and shoot him in the eyes more often than I do to prostitutes when I want to shoot that load and run off with my money while they're still screaming and unaware that they're now infected with an incurable ocular disease that I like to call smegment sight. Claire convinces Annette to momentarily stop being as useless as she is inexplicably cracked out, just long enough to heal her own daughter, while Leon gives Ada the most extreme pump and dump I've seen since that time I pumped a gallon of premium gas into my girl's womb while she was sleeping, then kicked her off the side of a cliff into a flaming pile of other women whom I accidentally impregnated while they were also sleeping and completely unaware of who I was or what I was doing. R.I.P. Sharkquifa, I miss you, bae. Despite her protestations for Leon to just drop her so she can get on with using her hookshot to slink away like the yellow-bellied Leon sucker that she is, Leon tries his best to pull her hand to his face because she scratched her beehole earlier and he wants one last second-hand sniff of that backside quiff. In the penultimate showdown, Claire utilizes the elastic tensile strength of her intact hymen to heft a 400-pound minigun and take down a version of Birkin who went beast mode while hurrying up some stairs, like we all do when no one's looking, and got stuck. While Leon blows Mr. X in half with a rocket supplied by a shadowy figure who has a Chinese finger trap for a pussy. In the slightly remixed second scenarios, players will encounter one more boss who frankly puts the QT in QTE, this virtual vagina dentata, who may motivate melanoid onlookers to declare, "Girl, that's a booty hole," inspires Leon to impersonate his own bastard son Dante by screaming, "Fuck you, I'm your date to the prom, you ugly piece of shit." Afterwards, the absolute sociopath Sherry proves her parents' reluctance to spend time with her completely reasonable by cheerily trying to set herself up in Claire's rumpus room with a puppy and a parrot, mere minutes after both of her parents horrifically died in front of her. A trucker then flips them off and drives into Raccoon City to become infected with brain AIDS and eventually nuked, as all truckers probably should. After completing the two main campaigns, the tacked-on second-run mode that play more like hard mode rather than actual alternate scenarios, and coming to terms with the fact that Raccoon City's outbreak was merely an elaborate ruse concocted by Chris Redfield to trick Leon into fucking Chris's own Neanderthal-faced, cock-shriveling ace of a sister because not even Mr. X wants to give it to her. Players can continue the calamitous cavalcade of contemptuous cadavers by challenging the various survivor modes. In the fourth survivor and tofu modes, players either play as Shadman as he takes the longest possible route to the police station gates because he's apparently too busy fantasizing about children's cartoon characters with horrifically engorged and pierced booty holes to bust out a window or blow open the front door, or they can play as a collection of the most sought-after columns of spongy white flesh for people to jam into their mouths since my penis. These jiggly, giggy putties would have been better off being made of Indian food, since the enemies would have been too afraid of getting the curry shits to bite them, and include a literal soy boy so full of estrogen that he stole Jill's head, yet is menacing enough to carry about 20 Puerto Rican credit cards at a time. A green tofu looking to unexpectedly explode in someone's face, like I occasionally do when I time my shot just right while ghost riding my tricycle pantsless past a bunch of fat stanky bitches at the bus stop. And this seductively sweet piece of street meat who makes me want to skeet on her non-existent feet. Unfortunately, there's currently no way to play as Judge Fudge, as, like Sheva Alamar's bodaciously beige booty that I'd beg to bop like beautiful bongos, He's far too busy being delicious. Though, I don't particularly get why people were so excited to play as Hunk. Yeah, I'm playing Resident Evil 2 as a Hunk. I also go to work as a Hunk, walk my dog as a Hunk, and my ex told the divorce court that I was a hunk of shit who tried to lock her in a cupboard and feed her only cream of wheat that I farted on, but that's besides the point. These modes represent the epitome of the RE2 experience and require mastering the movement, combat, and loadouts of each character in relation to the set patterns of enemies and obstacles. You literally can't make a single mistake, and Resident Evil hasn't been this intense since a wagon filled with unsold copies of Resident Evil Revelations 2 were hijacked by members of the Cherokee Nation on its way to a sacred burial at a landfill. The 4 Ghost Survivor scenarios explore what would have happened if some of the supporting characters and glorified props had survived the events of the main campaign. In Forgotten Soldier, players lead not Hunk backwards through the lab, through a gaggle of zombies who must have been halfway through getting ready to go roller skating, and toward the train. In Runaway, Mayor McButterface's daughter both confuses my penis and made me oh so happy to unlock one of the in-game masks. Somehow, despite being the wettest she's been since a half-off Locks sale at the Bagel Hut, her white shirt refuses to emulate Bruce Jenner after he murdered a woman with his car by becoming transparent. And to be perfectly honest, if I wanted to shoot up a bunch of naked printer paper pale inbred retards, I wouldn't have dug that elaborate labyrinth beneath my secret basement where I dump unwanted offspring and potential witnesses for the prosecution. In No Time to Mourn, Kendo leaves his daughter for Zed and sprints past enemies plagiarized from the second half of my novel, Europe 2 Barack's Apocalypse, with purple haze all in their brains, cause lately things, they don't seem the same. They acting funny, but we don't know why. Excuse them while they bite this guy. In No Way Out, Sheriff Ravioli Lips does his best impression of a Korean corner shop owner who just judo flipped an 8-year-old black girl who tried to steal a carton of menthols and fights off wave after wave of mindless monstrosities bent on turning his convenience store into an inconvenience store. Clean up every aisle. Overall, Resident Evil 2 Infected Jigaboo is a pretty good reimagining of the original game, though they didn't quite fulfill all my hopes and dreams of including true A and B side scenarios where Leon would team up with Sherry like buddy cops and Ada would les out with Claire. The Ghost Survivors, retooled Mr. X, and litany of nude Ada Wong mods made for a pretty fun experience. It was well worth buying at launch and nearly brings the amount of good games in the series equal to the amount of god-awful embarrassments. Well, that's it for today's video. If you liked it, you can be a kawaii babe and tell your bestest friend all about it. Use the links provided in the description of this video to join my Discord so you can receive alerts for when I live stream or to just chat with other fans. Check out one of my original comedic paperbacks, ebooks, or audiobooks on Amazon. Toss a buck at me on Patreon for a right to vote on which game or subject I'll make my next video about. Or you can do none of those things and get to work on making some hardcore, flan-sexual source filmmaker porn so she can wobble wobble, shake it shakin', drop it, ooh, take it. Rrrr. Part 3, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, released in 1999. Every now and then I'll hear someone complain that Resident Evil 4 turned the Resident Evil franchise from thoughtful survival horror into a full-on action series. Obviously those fuckers have never played Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, because in Nemesis, Jill Valentine returns with a refined arsenal, an expanded moveset, and an outfit stolen from a $1 per poke meth-addicted prostitute. Honestly, Jill looks less like she needs to worry about coming down with the T-virus than the zombies need to worry about contracting the AIDS virus from biting her. Jill is also inexplicably a ginger this time around, which I can only assume was intended to make the game spookier. Survival, or more specifically item management, is less of a concern in Nemesis than it was in its predecessors due to the sheer amount of ammunition and healing items scattered around the map. However, the locations and sets of items found in Nemesis are partially randomized. Odds are, when most players enter the STARS office in the police station, they'll find the somewhat powerful Magnum in a locker. If the player uses the gunpowder scrounged in the preceding areas to create grenade rounds, the extremely powerful grenade launcher is near guaranteed to appear in the locker instead. No matter which item is found, its counterpart appears later in another fixed location. Enemy hordes are also pulled randomly from a pool of possible scenarios, and often clearing an area of one mob will cause the other option to spawn during a later return. This keeps the sense of danger active at all times and prevents the player from knowing exactly what to do every time they enter a familiar location. While Resident Evil 3 focuses on just a few enemy types, the variety of character models within the subgroups are particularly impressive. Jill faces off against 2 varieties of hunters, literally dozens of unique zombies, and even the titular nemesis has varying loadouts depending on how you play. Difficulty-wise, Resident Evil 3 has a hard mode and an easy mode with no in between. I cannot vouch for the merits of easy mode since even as a kid I refused to play it. In hard mode, like some Aspergian perverts' pocket watch themed fursona, enemies take a dicking and keep on ticking. Most of the time you'll want to just run past them, which is easier said than done since most enemies want to grab Jill and hold her tight just as much as the rest of us. The Nemesis appears often and takes gigantic stockpiles of ammo to drop should you choose to fight him. However, since you are playing on hard mode, the Nemesis also drops extremely powerful gear like an improved pistol that fires incredibly fast, a sawed-off shotgun with improved stopping power, and containers that compact 3 health sprays into a single item slot. The drops make for great rewards, save for when they arbitrarily don't drop because the game is hardwired to expect you to run away. It's pretty annoying to fight the Nemesis twice in a row, only to find that you didn't get an item drop from the second fight, and that you've blown your stockpile of ammunition for nothing. The reloading tool completely flips the ammunition management system of the franchise on its head, making the components of ammunition intended for weaker weapons viable components for more powerful ammunition instead. Expert players will skip the shotguns available in Nemesis entirely, utilizing their class of gunpowder to craft freeze and flame rounds for the grenade launcher instead. My only complaint about this system is that you cannot break down unwanted ammunition that is already assembled into its component gunpowders. This would have added further utility to the reloading tool and made item management a great deal easier. As competent as the music and the sound design are in Resident Evil 3, the level design is an absolute clusterfuck that makes no sense. I don't know who the dickhead engineer is that made it impossible to enter City Hall without a pocket full of crystals, but I'm glad that fucker's city got destroyed. Imagine having to look around a concrete dictionary, 8 gems, a pipe wrench, and a crank every time you want to go into City Hall for work. As much as I praised Silent Hill for having a lived-in feel, where every building has kitchens, bathrooms, and appropriate furnishings, the areas of Raccoon City flow from one to another without any semblance of logical utility. Why exactly does this diner store their meat in a flooded basement that can only be reached by a ladder? Why the fuck is the only gas station in town located at the end of the street too narrow for cars to pass through? At times, Resident Evil 3 almost feels like a larger game was planned, canned, and its completed components mushed together like the faces of multiple pugs in a trash compactor. Nemesis also continues the original PlayStation series' proud tradition of god-awful voice acting, terrible dialogue, and spastic Italian-American with Parkinson-styled hand-jiving during conversations. Glue a knife to Jill's hand and she could carve Nemesis up like a Christmas goose just by talking to it. Which brings me to the titular character of Resident Evil 3, the Nemesis. The Nemesis punches women in the face, and I can appreciate that, but for a guy specifically designed to kill Jill, he spends an awful lot of time not killing her. Often, all you have to do to escape him is walk down a staircase or pass through a flimsy door that he could easily bust open. Sure, there are a few situations where he actively pursues Jill from room to room, but those are scripted, and even then you can still easily escape. Why he doesn't just use his tentacle arm to punch Jill directly in the cunt where her defenses are the weakest is beyond me. Perhaps he just doesn't want his fingers to stink of Jill's ginge-tinged minge. Completing the main campaign unlocks Mercenaries mode, which tasks the player with rescuing a set number of survivors in a given area in a certain amount of time. The 3 player characters all have wildly different loadouts, but play in identical areas with identical enemies, the only functional difference being that if you want to earn money quick, you'll use Mikhail's gear to rack up kills, and if you want an exercise in futility, you can knife enemies to death as Nikolai instead. Successfully completing Mercenaries mode unlocks items for the single player mode, but since you have to be single player in order to unlock Mercenaries mode, the unlockables seem a little bit pointless for anyone who already beat the game on hard. Overall, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is an old, but not dated game that's worth checking out. Between unlockables, quick time selection events, the challenge of confronting Nemesis more often, randomized enemies, the various strategies for utilizing gunpowder, Mercs mode, and the competency of the core gameplay, Resident Evil 3 is an extremely enjoyable and replayable game. In honor of the level of passion and loving care that Capcom put into developing Resident Evil 3's remake, I was tempted to compose this video essay entirely out of repurposed clips and sound bites harvested from my pre-existing videos on the Resident Evil 2 remake and Resident Evil 7. Fortunately for you lovable scamps who smell like feet, unlike Capcom, I have just enough integrity to crap out this low effort, yet wholly original shitpost of a video essay instead. Oh boy. The original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, much like my first girlfriend Mongo Lydia, was a brilliant, if not fundamentally flawed, touchstone of my childhood. Though, to be perfectly honest, my obese tongue strangler of cats and my first awkward erections alike was less fundamentally flawed than she was fun and mentally flawed. And like that drooling giver of waterhead, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis had a sort of half-finished splendor that could only be conceived while its creators were heavily drinking. The Nemesis ran around in his underpants, assaulting lasciviously dressed white women, like I do whenever the streetlights behind the Fuddruckers burn out, which on a side note, is a little something my grandpappy used to call getting the brown in during a blackout. But he died after getting his nutsack stuck in a shampoo bottle, so who cares what he had to say, that stupid dummy? Nemesis allowed players to mix all sorts of gunpowders and explosives without them first having to realize that the Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. And perhaps most impotent of all, the original third Resident Evil game bought the series just enough goodwill to survive the deluge of digitized diarrhea that was Resident Evil Code Veronica, Resident Evil Survivor, and Resident Evil Gaiden. The quality of the installments in the Resident Evil franchise is as pendulous as my exposed testicles in a wind tunnel, which, by the way, is something I do because it's the only way I can remove the crabs without killing them. I am an animal lover after all. For every good Resident Evil game, there is an equal but opposingly terrible Resident Evil game to counteract it. If Capcom put out a Resident Evil themed bag of cat food tonight, you could expect them to release a Resident Evil themed can of dog shit by the morning. For 3 long, terrible years, the original Nemesis served as a buoy for loyal fans to cling to just long enough for the series to rebound with a masterful Resident Evil 1 remake, only for Capcom to then immediately shit the bed again with Resident Evil 0, also known in some circles as Murder of a Franchise's Backstory on the Orient Express. I love you, Resident Evil, but I wonder at times if it wouldn't be for the best to put you down. I mean, I loved my cat too, but he saw what I do in the secret room beneath my tool shed, and that's nearly as bad as what you fuckers did with Operation Raccoon City. I hope God forgives you boys for that one, because I know that I never will. If Resident Evil 8 is any good, why not just stop there before you ruin the balance again with a rushed remake of RE4? Oh wait, I know why. Speaking of which, today's video is brought to you by my novels Europe Hillary's Invasion, Europe 2 Barack's Apocalypse, and my mystery novella Split in Two. These underpriced portals into the mind of a barrel-chested pussy melter are available as paperbacks, ebooks, and audiobooks on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. Please consider buying them so I can afford a towel to wipe up my cum with, and finally free the shaved orangutan I keep chained to my desk and shoot my loads of chode a la mode directly into his quavering mouth. It's a living! Well, hey everybody, It's your good old pal EmptyHero, and today, because the lack of a new video was hurting my bottom line, we're gonna discuss the video game equivalent of writing a book report on a book you haven't actually read while the teacher is busy collecting everyone else's paper. Our descent into the mouth of mediocrity begins with a montage of news so fake that I was surprised it didn't conclude with a blonde-haired Jew broad with tits that stick out farther than her nose, blaming the viral outbreak on President Donald Trump. Our protagonist then triumphantly rolls out of her disgusting, dirty laundry-festooned twin-size bed, crushing an empty Haagen-Dazs pint beneath her lickable little feet, and proceeding to bathe in the bathroom sink like the Mexican janitor woman who she was modeled after, with her greasy face, spicy Latin temper, and spicy Latin queef. This version of Jill Valorenzotine seems more suited to fishing used tampons out of a clogged public toilet than to taking on legions of the undead with so much gusto you'd almost mistake them for my cock. And look, I'm not just saying that because I want to fuck the Julia Voss incarnations of Jill in the ass until her hot liquid dookie fills my shoes and saturates my shag carpeting, much in the way that her love has saturated my eternal soul. But I can't be too hard on this version of Jill, and I mean that metaphorically, not just as a description of my flaccid and backwards-facing hooker humper and dumper thumper. The implied backstory to this new Resident Evil 3 is that Jill lives alone, is turning 30 soon, and her dog has been taken away after someone from animal control noticed all the golden retriever hairs glued to the back of Jill's scraped-up cankles. The player witnesses the horror as she hits the wall in real time and tries to rearrange her face back to being pretty with a bullet, then just leaves the sink running full blast like a 5-year-old who's brushing his teeth. I mean, really, kids, there are starving children in Africa who would love for you to spit that used-up toothpaste directly into their mouth, and you're just washing it down the drain like a turd or an unwanted pregnancy of the same color of that turd. Grow up. There in her lonely condo full of fruit-flavored beer and Latin temper pills, instead of a husband who loves her and their children who will carry on their genetic legacy into the future, our man-hating mestizo mademoiselle with a moderately mushable mound of mamilla meatballs sups upon the sour fruits of feminism, much in the way that you and I might dine upon a delicious Knish-flavored Hot Pocket or a small bird that inadvertently flew into our mouths. No one at the Raccoon City Police Department believed Jill's reports on the events of the original Resident Evil, which I can only assume is the direct result of the original game's script being so terrible. I mean, why would Barry call Jill the master of unlocking things if she doesn't even carry her own lockpick? That's like if I called my fifth wife La Chartre the master of having a black eye before she burnt the roast. I mean, really. Oh, and Jill's only contact to the outside world is a fat nerd who dresses like a hydraulically stabilized Michael J. Fox knockoff, and he sends her messages via the second greasiest cheese-splattered box in Jill's pathetic condo, which is somehow smaller than mine. And I suck dicks for a living. Made $400.05 the other day sucking dirty unwashed hobo penises under a bridge. Which one of them paid a nickel, you ask? They all did. Excuse me, boys. I was just doing a quick impression of your mother. But all jokes about your fat, knob-slobbing hotel for gel of a mother aside, let's get back to the game. The new nemesis pops through walls due to being unable to locate the 3 color-coded gemstones and Moonlight Sonata piano music tablature required to open the front door, and immediately grabs Jill by her stanky pussy. Those who dislike new Nemesis design take note. The poor boy's nose is crooked for a reason. Nemesis took one whiff of Jill's unclean vagine that resembles a fried aubergine, and his awe-stricken nose tried to run away from his face. The same thing happened to Michael Jackson after sniffing one too many 5-year-old boys' shrimp-flavored Go-Gurt and chocolate milk farts directly from the tap. While we're on the subject of Nemesis, I just want to get a major problem with this remake out of the way. The original game's iconography has been destroyed, and the new elements brought in to replace them, like a hooker who I beat to a pulp after I realized that her gigantic mushy pussy lips that have been slapping me in the legs with every thrust are actually just plump testicles, and I've been making love to a man's cavernous belly button while he hides his dingus in an ironically named fanny pack are more hit than miss. At this point, the intro concludes with more cutscenes than a Star Wars The Phantom Menace fan edit, and after escaping the trillion-dollar bioweapon specifically designed to kill Jill by jogging at a brisk pace in a straight line, Jill stumbles out of her apartment complex and limps toward the liquor store as if she only just then realized that she's 30 years old and alone. Now, for those of you who didn't quite get the last Star Wars joke, please bear in mind that I'm just having a little fun with homophones, which is what it's called when you whisper a message into a dapper homosexual man's cavernous gaping booty hole, and he duck walks some distance to relay that message by farting it into the ear of a third very good friend. Brad then meets up with Jill and is instantly bitten because this dipshit is somehow genre savvy enough to know about zombies, but not smart enough to wear body armor with sleeves. He might as well have walked through Italy slathered in meatballs, or Chinatown covered in baby mice, centipedes, or whatever other disgusting shit they feel like eating live on TikTok, and ruining my otherwise perfectly good erection as a result. Dario Rosso then appears for a whopping 10 seconds of screen time before locking himself in an airtight storage container and realizing all too late that having a burrito dipped in Indian food for lunch was probably not ideal. A doomed helicopter pilot takes more of an explosive load to the face than I did that one time I fell backwards down the stairs as a direct consequence of foolishly trying to jack off while using the polished wooden handrail to snake my luscious dangly balls around so they wouldn't touch the dirty floor, and Jill drives her car away like a typical woman would. Carlos appears, festooned with the same hair I have after straightening my pubes by plopping my pulsating plums on a plasma ball, and new Jill cements her status of not even being tsundere, but instead the dreaded double soon by denying Carlos his rightful God-given access to her especially erotic shoulder punani. Down in the subway, Carlos reveals that he had a rocket launcher, but not bolt cutters, due to having already used them up on the fence he destroyed while entering this country, and the player's suspension of disbelief is broken beyond repair due to the lack of even one subway-dwelling homeless Nubian king loudly listening to Baptist sermons on YouTube via their $600 phones while making direct eye contact with you and masturbating furiously in his sweatpants. It's the small details that matter, Capcom. Jeez. I would also like to take umbrage with the filthy nature of Jill and Carlos's dialogue. I am a learned man with several degrees of Kevin Bacon, and my ears are not rubbish bins for the ne'er-do-wells at Capcom to discard their verbal garbage within. A vestigial remnant from the original game then recognizes Jill's moist-to-the-touch looking, mannish face from all the rudimentary source filmmaker porn I've made where she sucks a bunch of cars up with her dick, and the game finally begins. As a side note, the ammo crafting guide found in this area mentions that a gun without ammo is as useless as a wet fart, which frankly offends me. The lack of ingenuity on Capcom's part in utilizing one of those moist echoes of the soul of man, emanating from the deepest recesses within the heart of his bottom too. Let's say, seal an envelope, knock an eyelash out of a precious newborn's beautiful eye, or momentarily override the natural stench of New Jersey, just goes to further demonstrate the lack of creativity inherent in this farce of a game. There in the gimped hub world of Raccoon City, with the city hall, diner, newspaper office, forest, graveyard, clock tower, randomized enemies, and soul removed, Jill is tasked with taking miles of hose so she can snuff out a fire, much in the way that I enjoy ruining other people's romantic campfire snugglings, by bursting out of the underbrush nude and emphatically demonstrating just how hard I can piss after consuming an entire pot of boiled asparagus. The donut shop, apartment, and alleys of the central hub are serviceable, but are about as memorable as the joke about the unicorn with Down syndrome I mentioned about 3 minutes ago. The first real, hey, this isn't all that bad moment of the game unfurls, much like my penis within a courtroom, Within the confines of the power station, wherein a flock of boisterous belly bugs have erected a gigantic testicle atop the towers in anticipation of the red-hot electric C&B torture that is to come, Jill demonstrates her complete lack of a gag reflex as an insect fills her stomach with the first life Jill has had inside of her since that one cucumber began to sprout roots. And if she takes a break from hobbling around like a disoriented young lad holding in a shark during a gay pride parade out of the mortal fear of arousing the crowd, to think of Resident Evil Umbrella Corps long enough to puke, a poignant metaphor for feminism takes place as the man outside of the power station is killed by his baby bugs, while Jill can take the easy way out by aborting the children due to this being her body and her choice. Now, you may have noticed that the bugs birthed out of Jill fully formed following a single hit, leading one to wonder why they needed to be implanted within her stomach in the first place. Well, you stupid dummy you. If you had paid attention at all in school, you would know that belly bugs require the nutrients from half-digested pizzas and Fruit Ninja smoothies to hatch, thus making Jill the perfect host. Nemesis then realizes that you tried to run, tried to hide, and breaks on through to the other side. The chase that ensues lasts for a whopping 2 minutes if you bothered to clear out the main hub before turning the power on, or figured out that you can just knock Nemesis over with a single grenade. The only new wrinkle added to Jill's elaborate escape is the first appearance of the dreaded butthole scorpions that Mike Pence tried to warn us about during gay conversion therapy camp before lulling us to sleep with a gentle spooning. Jill then breaches the bank vault door to the sewer, which I can only assume was erected to keep out turd burglars. Players will then suffer the consequences of the birth control hormones that the lewd women of Raccoon City have been urinating into the sewers, combined with the T-virus to turn the frogs gay. If these albino goat-faced street sharks clip into a single polygon of Jill while she treads ankle-deep in feces like a dyslexic gay man who loves fisting, they will put her into the gamma clutch, snap her back, and make her hamble. This area seems to be meant to replace the sewer fight against the gravedigger, and for that, somebody needs to be slapped. Nemesis then reappears and shows off his best impression of Dick Clark discussing astronomy. Jill flees into a revamped version of the original game's construction zone, then has her first real battle against the Nemesis, in the sort of place one might expect Jackie Chan to juggle ladders and babies, utilizing the brilliant Sun Tzu-inspired strategy of shooting the Nemesis enough times to justify jumping off of the building, rather than simply jumping off at the start of the fight instead. Jill escapes to the land of recycled assets, and the Nemesis reappears with a rocket launcher and his nose crooked from pulling another gay-ass leather shirt over his face. Furious from having chafed his nipples without need, the Nemesis fires a barrage of rockets towards Jill that have no effect on the environment and do nothing to Jill if she lurches slightly forward before they explode. Toy Uncle loses his head, which rolls in a manner as unintuitive and backwards as the quality of the remaining areas of this game. Carlos takes on an ultimately pointless wild goose chase at the police station in order to pad out the length of the game, and the developers have the nerve to tease the player by showing them the clock tower in the distance, but never actually letting them inside, much as my parents used to do with my childhood home. I can still remember those rainy nights, naked and afraid. No one around to rub my feet and tell me that I'm pretty. Now the police tried to tell me that it wasn't my childhood or my home, that it all went down just last week, and that I can never come within 500 feet of that family again. But nuts to those jerks. I only have 2 feet, leaving me with a buffer of 498 feet that those glow-in-the-dark CIA spooks never accounted for in their crooked calculations. So mama, put another pickled pig's foot on the skillet. Baby's coming home. Following a little dippy in the waters of Raccoon City, the Nemesis pops back to the surface, looking like some degenerate deviant art persona. halfway through the fight that ensues, Nem decides that the floor is lava, creating a fight that is actually pretty fun. It's a shame the developers decided to make you go through this exact same fight a couple of levels later, but hey, boss designs don't grow on trees. It's not like they had a previous released Resident Evil 3 and they could borrow enemy designs from... Oh wait! I fucking did! One Japanese handshake later, and Carlos carries Jill as far away from the clock tower in the entire second act of the original game as possible. Now, I don't want you guys to think that I'm just mindlessly hating on this game. The developers obviously tried their best with the limited amount of time Capcom gave them to go gold. The hospital area that follows, like the masturbatorial material for a mentally ill Native American male with a fetish for his own house, is pretty tense. I thought it was a nice touch for a guy named Carlos to enter a hospital without first having to steal an elderly white pensioner's insurance information, and to also leave without having to make the beds. The hunters, which are now crustier than my stomach the day after my balls drop, provide a nice change of pace in the combat. Dr. Bard's Smith & Wesson Indian Dot gives me a good opportunity to mention my second sponsor for this video, the all-Indian dating website connectthedots.com. At c2d.com, you can put two in the goo, but not poo in the loo. And the way Carlos opens the door to the purple drank vaccine, required to save Joe's life by punching the computer's monitor, thereby saving him the trouble of chasing down a soda to pour on the keyboard instead, reminds me of all those great movies from the 80s I used to watch on daytime TV to drown out the sounds of my mother screaming for help from the basement. Sorry, Mammy, but you know the rules. You're only allowed upstairs to give birth, then it's back into the hole. A glorified castle defense battle against hordes of low frame rate enemies that are seemingly more interested in the aromatic ham and cheese hot pocket Jill keeps in her back pocket in case of emergencies, rather than eating you ensues. Our grease-slathered bastardization of a once pure waifu awakens with a cum sock wrapped around her arm, and the sinking realization that this is the exact moment that the developers of Resident Evil 3's remake would run out of money and hastily phone in the final segments of the game. Apparently, the Dead Factory from the original PlayStation game would have been too much effort to recreate, so an incredibly dull collection of rooms created from assets recycled from the previous installment's Nest Lab ensues. The orphanage zombie from Remake 2's free DLC appear with their dicks out for Harambe, some actually interesting looking Mr. X rejects that we should have been allowed to fight stare at you listlessly from their cum jars, and a token black character who is obviously about to die warns Jill that a nuke will destroy Raccoon City unless she can locate a vaccine for the T-virus in time. Bear in mind that Jill literally just received a dosage of the chemical needed to cure the virus, thereby granting her with the antibodies required to produce another vaccine. Jill, however, is as stupid as Remake 3's developer, so this option is never explored. Upon assembling a vaccine that will obviously be dropped or stolen at some point, because otherwise Nikolai would have nothing to do, Jill then proceeds to drop the vaccine and Nikolai steals it. You may wonder, why haven't I mentioned Nikolai up to this point in the video? And frankly, it's because Russian man bad is not a compelling character trait. The exact same boss fight from the clock tower courtyard ensues, ending only when Carlos arbitrarily decides to crush the nemesis with a mechanical arm, then flood the area with a lethal dose of Mountain Dew. Now, I know the nemesis committed unforgivable atrocities, but even he didn't deserve such a grim fate. The game caps off with an epic showdown between Jill and an anthropomorphization of my foreskin on a hot summer's day, and honestly, I know most people hate this fight, but once you figure it out, it's a 10th upgrade from the crawling beehole final boss fight of the original game. Carlos and Jill then escape, leaving Nikolai stranded in the interstitial state of having been set up perfectly for a Ghost Survivor campaign, yet never receiving one, though Knowing those jackasses at Capcom, they'll announce exactly that DLC the day after I finish editing this video, much in the same way they did with the DLC for Resident Evil 2's remake. Perhaps some of you are expecting me to end this review with a brief rundown of Resident Evil Resistance, the video game equivalent of the plastic red spoons that came bundled with Lunchables and were only consumed by bowl-cut hair aficionados, but that would have required me to have been able to stomach more than 5 minutes of it. Suffice to say, the lack of variety in enemy types apparent in this remake, and the deluge of original assets utilized for this shitty Left 4 Dead clone are particularly heartbreaking, as putting Resistance's assets and dev time into this remake would have resulted in one excellent game, rather than one that is just okay, and another that I don't even want for free. In short, my dick is longer than this game, and scarier too, but that doesn't mean that you and your fat smelly mother shouldn't play with them both. Well, that's it for today's video. I'd like to thank my members, Patreons, Discord members, and that one lady at the bus stop who crop dusted me with a burrito brap, just as my erection was beginning to lose steam, for making all this possible. As a quick reminder, my streams are still live on this channel, but the archives are hosted on my second channel, EmptyHero Streams. For my next big project, I'm gonna finish editing my horror/adventure novel, Curse of Wilson, and release a couple of promotional videos for it and my other novels during the interim. Once Curse of Wilson is complete, my next YouTube project proper will be a massive video detailing the unending stupidity of Final Fantasy X, so that I can finally erase the 500 gigabytes of Final Fantasy X gameplay footage I have on my hard drive to make room for some saucy Lulu from Final Fantasy X avant-garde source filmmaker kinos instead. Until next time, my serendipitous little shooting stirs. Thanks for your time and goodbye! Part 4, Resident Evil 4, released in 2005. Resident Evil 4 is a near-timeless classic, save for some glaring oversights that should have been addressed in this high-definition port. While this port does a great deal to improve the basic walking and aiming mechanics, you are still forced to stand still while shooting, and while I could excuse this issue in the original release, this is the 7th port of Resident Evil 4, and they should have fixed this by now. And don't tell me this would break the game. Making Leon's reticle bounce like a pair of titties when he runs, and gently, like testicles riding a gentle ocean wave when he walks, solves any problems that run and gunning could have caused. Leon also cannot strafe, which makes turning tight corners a problem. Often, you'll turn 90 degrees down a hallway and run directly into an enemy that is just as surprised as you are. This is a case of you can see Leon and Leon can see the enemy, but you cannot see what Leon sees, so you are completely fucked. Not being able to strafe also makes laterally dodging incoming projectiles near impossible. While I agree that the inventory system is a nice mechanic, it makes for a nice balance of what you can and cannot hoard over the course of the game. Not being able to switch weapons on the fly slows gameplay to a crawl and destroys the tension. The directional pad is perfect for this function, but is utilized as a pointless alternative for the thumbstick controls instead. The knife system is also needlessly convoluted. You have to stand perfectly still, then swipe a circular arc that can make judging distances odd and lead to near misses. Newer games in the franchise activate a knife swipe with a single button press and even allow you to knife while running, which goes a long way to making the knife viable against regular enemies. QuickTime events in any game bother me. Now I don't mind the occasional contextual button prompt to cold cock a hot cunt in the face, but having to mash the X button to outrun gigantic rocks is giving me carpal tunnel, and they could have affected the same sense of panic by forcing Leon to navigate a narrow area filled with enemies and bear traps while escaping the rolling rocks instead. Visually, Resident Evil 4 was and still is a well-designed game. Enemies and locations are both memorable and distinct, but calling this port high definition is completely dishonest. Environmental textures is still a muddy Nintendo 64 quality mess, and there's practically no lighting engine. Some people will play Resident Evil 4 for the first time and discredit it for feeling generic and outdated. While I won't call these people dummies, I will call these stupid dummies ignorant sluts. Resident Evil 4 only feels generic because it is the source of a million imitators, and serves well as an example in the difference between being good for innovating and simply copying previous innovations. Resident Evil 4's over-the-shoulder camera and vulnerable AI partner mean that not only was your ability to aim and take out enemies improved over Resident Evil 3, but you also had a vulnerable partner that needed you to be skilled to avoid her being killed. Resident Evil 5 refined that innovation by adding smart AI partners that could shoot proficiently, bring you items, heal you or themselves, or die if neglected. It's a nice step up from having to babysit Ashley, who, like most babies I deal with, often winds up in a dumpster. And for what it was, it worked well enough. 4 has to be viewed not only by the current standard, but at the standard of its original release. This was the Seinfeld of video games. There was nothing else like it at launch, and now everyone else has stolen their ideas to the point that the uninitiated and unwashed masses may see the material as being played out. What most modern games should have stolen from Resident Evil 4, however, was the spirit of invention. 4 does a great job of changing your location, the characters you interact with, the types of enemies you face, the gameplay style, and the weapons you have available constantly so that it never gets old. You'll go from kneecapping peasants in a village to assaulting a fortified base, to ducking Emperor Palpatine's understudies in a castle, sprinting from invisible bugs in a sewer, hiding from mutants in a grotto, to so many other locations that they have to be played to be appreciated. Bosses include my 10-year-old Uncle Georgie, a QuickTime event, Rambo's dad, one of my sperms, Yakov's pants fallen off, an H.R. Geiger alien, Hillary Clinton's genitals, and I have no idea. The main 4 weapon types provide a near-perfect balance. Precision pistol shots can knock down regular enemies and set them up for melee attacks. Shotgun blasts can knock over crowds of anything smaller than a gigante. The TMP is swift and kills most anything with a quick burst to the belly. The rifle is a long-range monster and close-range liability. And the Magnum absolutely destroys everything, but is hard to find ammo for outside of capacity upgrades. Other weapon types include the "I'm a little bitch so I'll spend 30,000 pesetas to instantly kill this boss" rocket launcher, the mine launcher that I respect myself too much to use, the knife which does almost no damage to regular enemies but makes certain bosses a complete joke, and this ray gun that you get for beating professional mode that one hit kills everything and completely destroys the challenge of the game. However, ammo is so plentiful and you spend so much time kicking everyone's ass that unless you just plain suck at the game, you'll rarely feel overwhelmed. Although to be fair, this new port does add larger waves of enemies in certain areas, and my having played this game 10 times might have a little something to do with my perception of ease. The writing is campy fun, which is both good and bad.
Well, I see that the president's equipped his daughter with ballistics too.
For an action game, the quippy humor is good fun and makes the breaks in the gameplay tolerable, but for a horror game, it serves only to break the tension. It also doesn't help that the writers contradict themselves often. The cult wants to infect Ashley with plagas, then send her home to infect the President of America. Well, at the start of the game, she is already infected. They should have just sent her back home to America with Leon. The writing also sidesteps plot developments that could have helped with the horror element. After watching this scene, it's hard not to think that Salazar was supposed to be a child, but was rewritten as an adult midget at the last second. An undead child, twisted and manipulated by a cult, would have been notably tragic, and could have led to a nice angle of Salazar being childishly cruel. Instead, he just comes off as a complete dickhead with no motivation for his actions, aside from the fact that he, being a manlet, is naturally predisposed to impotent rage. Late in the game, a cutscene highly implies that some gonados are about to blow gonad loads deep inside of Ashley's No Man Cove. Instead of freaking out, Leon just quips to himself and continues to mosey at a casual pace. And when you find Ashley later, not only does she mention nothing about taking piping hot prostate polywogs in her poopa, she doesn't say anything. And not in the "I'm sexually traumatized, sign me up for a Tumblr account" kind of way, but in the "just get back to playing the game, you dumb fuck" manner. Overall, my biggest gripe with the writing is the amount of lore and character development relegated to optional notes that you can pick up or ignore. While I appreciate the devs not forcing me to watch a bunch of cutscenes to find out that Lewis was a scientist researching the plagas, it could have been implied within the boundaries of the gameplay. Simply stumbling across his desk while in the laboratory would have been enough. It also hurts my brain when the big bad mastermind leaves behind a series of notes that is literally titled Our Plan for Leon to find. Also, Leon, for being a hardcore ass-kicking motherfucker, is inexplicably devoid of a penis. Not only does he rock a haircut left over from David Bowie's stint as a lesbian, he turns down primetime teenage twat due to a case of one-itis that he has for a woman he met 10 years ago and spent less than a total of 20 minutes interacting with. Look, I get it. Ada's ass is fat, and she looks like she could suck the foreskin back out of a circumcised dick. But she's also a manipulative bitch, and would just as easily devein your cock with a clam knife if given the chance. And while some of you might go so far as to say that Ashley has disgusting Dumbo ears, I say fuck that noise. Literally, I would wrap those gigantic lobes around my chode and blow a load inside her globe, thereby giving her a permanent set of hearing aids. Other play modes include Separate Ways, which feels like they scrapped a Claire-style B scenario for Ada Wong, and for the first half of this mode, you'll wonder why they even included it. Separate Ways muddies the already campy plot by having chickens shit out important keys, making Ada fight enemies that Leon was already supposed to have killed, and run meaningless errands that don't pan out. The second half plays out in new areas that you'll immediately understand why they were cut from the main game. Overall, this mode is good for one playthrough, but with the lack of a new game plus or higher difficulties, it's hard to recommend playing twice. Assignment Ada slaps Ada into a few more recycled areas, and while it provides a nice quick challenge, its only real addition to the formula is the fact that the further you advance, the more your inventory fills with junk items, and you'll have to toss out some goodies to make room. Mercenaries mode takes place in an enclosed arena with expandable time limits, unlimited enemies. It makes me wonder why these games don't feature more areas with infinite spawns, where you actually have to act quickly and never feel safe. Merc mode is generally the best part of the last several Resident Evil games, and Resident Evil 4 is no exception. While the level count is slim, the challenge and vastly different playing styles of each character makes for a surprisingly large amount of replayability. Leon had the least specialized loadout, and as a result, he has no real strengths or flaws. Wesker is a face-punching, grenade-tossing dynamo. Hunk carries a machine gun only, and makes short work of regular enemies, but struggles against the special spawns. Krauser rapes the butthole out of everything with his Rambo bow, and Ada increases the innate difficulty by forcing you to play with half of an erection. Overall, Resident Evil 4 HD could have learned some tricks from its younger siblings, and the upscaled textures disappoint, but the gameplay is still solid, and the characters and scenario are still fun. And to anybody who hasn't played it by now, you should either do so immediately or stop pretending to be somebody who plays video games.
Code Veronica X is the quintessential survival horror game, in so much that, in order to complete the game, the player will have to survive the pure, unadulterated horror of fetch quests so tedious and convoluted that the game would be 47 seconds long without them. No horribly mutated monster, atmospheric musical score, or devious environmental detail filled me with as much dread as entering a room and realizing I had to collect the 3 army seals a second goddamn time! Often, I wondered whether Code Veronica was actually a video game, or instead, some convoluted scheme perpetrated against us by the slinky Japanese as revenge for bombing them at Pearl Harbor. While there is a 1990s Steven Seagal movie-esque story wedged somewhere between the 500 MacGuffins you'll have to slog around, it's so laughably bad that you'll wonder what the qualifications are for being a writer at Capcom. I can only assume the game's producer gathered all the prospective developers into his dojo, then chose the lead writer based on who could perform the best calligraphy while clenching the brush between their butt cheeks. The narrative of Code Veronica begins with Claire Redfield outrunning the helicopter pilot from Godfather Part 3, who is so concerned that Claire might mess up his office a little bit that he shoots the entire fucking building to pieces. Strangely, despite Claire being so bent on escaping alive that she murders 20 men in cold blood, she refuses to shoot Billy D. Williams out of fear of being labeled a racist on Twitter. Somehow, this version of Claire reminds me of a clock, in so much that, despite the passage of time, I still want to run my disproportionate black hands all around her face. And I'm not the only one. Mere minutes into the game, Claire encounters a cheap Leon Kennedy knockoff whose balls dropped so recently that there's a divot on the floor between his Skechers and stretch marks on the base of his inadequate shaft. This Dark Moon energy collar wearing, hot topic shopping, go-gurt guzzling, school shooting, patricidal punk is what Japanese game developers thought was cool back in the year 2000, and in a way, Steve's design and characterization fit perfectly. Code Veronica X represents a transitional stage in the Resident Evil franchise, where the environments shifted from fixed angle images to full-on 3D. The amount of enemies and ammunition skyrocketed, and hair started growing in all the most caressable places. So, keeping that in mind, including a character who joined the one-man Mile High Club after soiling the back of Claire's shirt with gelatinous globs of his gonad slop while she slept, released deadly gas when a cute girl stood too close to him, and eventually transformed into an anthropomorphization of his own erection, resplendent with a deepened voice, massive shaft, and gallons of hot green Incredible Hulk cum, is pleasantly proper and practically poetic. Opposing Claire and Steve in their epic quest to escape an island they never meant to visit in the first place is a cis-con soy boy who dresses like Char Aznable, but instead of a mask, he wears a wig and a butt plug. Alfred is so infatuated with melonious man meat that the only way he'd ever shoot on a woman's face is with his hunting rifle, and the only thing split wider than his personality is his disgusting gritty butthole that resembles an open jar of mayonnaise. Though, he's not all bad. The moment when Alfred discovers everything he learned from Tumblr was a lie is the comedic highlight of the entire franchise. His sister, Alexia, is a sleepy slut who turns into a half-finished Greek statue, then a flying thalidomide baby, for no particular reason. Speaking of no particular reason, Wesker appears in this game. You may recall him dying at the end of the original Resident Evil game, but apparently he got better. Wesker slaps Claire around like she burned Thanksgiving dinner, then jumps away like the $1 Million Man, back to his room to pump off while looking at his own reflection. In order to further pad out the length of the game, Chris Redfield appears and inches closer towards his lifelong goal of punching boulders by climbing some instead. His entire campaign reeks of sloppy seconds, and when the game's designers tired of rehashing the first half of the game, they decided to rehash Resident Evil 1 instead. The few new areas explored by Chris would have served better if played through by either Claire or Steve, and Chris only serves to provide a thematic connection to the antagonist by providing a slightly healthier example of incestuous siblings. His interactions with Wesker are completely non-interactive and may as well have not occurred in this particular game. Gameplay-wise, Veronica features some interesting twists on the formula. Capcom must have outsourced some of the coding to Puerto Rico, since the knife in Code Veronica is the best in the entire series. Dual-wielding weapons can target 2 enemies at a time, or completely miss the single enemy directly in front of you. Fortunately, the enemy AI is about what you'd expect from a Resident Evil game. Enemies include the Bandersnatch, who can grab your snatch from off-screen, a vaginal sperm newt whom you can completely skip past, a plain infiltrating tyrant whom is furious because he can't grab Claire's luscious shitter with his dragon fruit hands, generic zombies, this single bass in a tank, poisonous moth who sucks a succulent sweet off of Claire's butt cheeks, my penis after that horrific joking accident I don't like to talk about, and the inappropriately named Nosferatu. I mean, he's right there. His name should be Feratu. Overall, Code Veronica is an interesting game that is equally as enjoyable as your personal tolerance for constantly running from one side of the map to the other and back again juggling jewels and butt plugs because your character is too fucking stupid to shoot out locks. Part 5, Resident Evil 5, released in 2009. Resident Evil 5 is the worst thing to happen to Africa since black people. Don't worry though,
It is not the banjo-lipped, spear-chucking mobs of melanin-mongering mobile menthol processing units within Resident Evil 5 that offend, but rather the sheer stupidity of its premise. Ouroboros is a virus made from flowers that turns people into angry spaghetti or boss monsters depending on whether or not the Ouroboros thinks they're cool. Wesker, the primary antagonist, is set up in a way that he could have been a tragic figure that was used and taken advantage of as a vulnerable, weak child, and Ouroboros could have been his method of eliminating weakness not just within society, but more poignantly within himself. Instead, Wesker is a grunting idiot that wants to turn everyone into Italian treats so that he can run around in his cosplay of Neo from the Matrix without being laughed at by children. Chris returned as a complete retard with about as much personality as the boulder he punches, and is a major step down from Resident Evil 4's clever and more rounded Leon. I would say that Jill has been reduced to being a glorified cum sleeve, but that's pretty much what she's always been, only this time around she's blonde and wears fetish gear. Sheva isn't really a new character per se, she's just a black Jill, a Blill, if you would. Were Sheva a real African woman, she'd have a bowl on her head, plates in her lips, a tablecloth for clothes, and you wouldn't know whether to fuck or eat dinner off of her. Sheva is an absolute liability during the fights that require teamwork and will rarely ever shoot a boss in the back, though she isn't completely worthless. I haven't seen a black woman give out explosive head like this since my first wife Loretta lost her teeth to an acute case of adult onset sickle cellulite, and every time I see Sheva I remember to stock up on maple syrup. You'd think in a game with a strong independent black woman main character you'd be able to move and shoot, and you're right. Though you can't run and gun on foot, Resident Evil 5 has an entire level dedicated to the fine African art of the drive-by shooting. Unfortunately, this level is complete monkey balls, and while playing online, you'll rarely find a second player willing to put up with it. You can strafe and switch items in real time, but selecting items from the corner of the item box mid-fight is like pissing with your dick sticking out of a bus window. Sure, you're still having fun, but with all the children screaming at you to get back in the driver's seat and the blaring horns of oncoming traffic and that burning sensation you get as that last drop squeaks out, it makes it hard to concentrate. The enemies haven't gotten any smarter since Resident Evil 4, so there's just more of them. And to be perfectly honest, if I wanted to be attacked by a crowd of mindless, disease-ridden black people, I'd just get on George Soros' bad side. Gameplay and level design-wise, Resident Evil 5 peaks in the Majinji town, and to a lesser extent, the tribal village later in the game. The second level has so many options for interacting with and destroying the environment, so many hidden items and choke points, and so many enemies pouring in from so many places that it makes every other level feel like a glorified corridor. You will rarely find yourself in a situation where enemies can flank you or attack from a distance, and having Sheva around only serves to make the game even easier. Her AI works most of the time, but like most black women, you have to know when to reel her back in. Compare the scenario with Sheva in attack mode, wherein she runs directly into a one-hit kill attack, then again in cover mode, for example. Online play is functional, even if the average person you'll match with randomly is a blithering idiot carrying 9 different guns or eggs exclusively. The majority of the levels look nice and provide enough variations of the base formula to keep things from going completely stale. However, the moment regular enemies get guns, like me the night after Taco Tuesday, the game completely shits the bed. You cannot move while shooting, so stopping to shoot one gun-toting enemy allows all the others to pick you off. Other enemy variations include the one-hit killing Reaper Roaches that I can deal with no problem, but Sheva has a nasty habit of hugging, and Liquor Beta that only show up in 2 places and never mixed in with other enemies. Otherwise, like the British forces during the Zulu Wars, you're exclusively fighting black people that ate bugs. Which leads us to part of Resident Evil 5's biggest problem, its complete lack of personality. The weapons cache available between missions means you can try new weapons without tossing old ones in the garbage, but there are so many weapons available that they all wind up feeling the same, and it just isn't as fun as trading with the merchant from Resident Evil 4. Levels lack atmosphere, and quick time event-laden action scenes are so poorly orchestrated that you'll wonder whether this is supposed to be satire. Wesker is such a poorly written, overacting mess that if this game had any sense of humor, I'd almost be impressed. Plot twists are obvious and fall flat. Sheva rarely says anything of merit and has literally no motivation for tagging it up with Chris other than for the convenience of the plot and to give me the occasional boner. Chris's plotline of survivor's guilt for outliving his partner Jill would have played out better without Sheva's presence and ultimately had zero payoff. He gets a thumbs up from Zero Suit Samus Jill, activates the QuickTime event with Black Jill, then sits alone in a bar waiting for Resident Evil 6 to start. Like the tube socks I use on Saturday night, other modes help round out this already fairly impressive package, but aren't anything special on their own. Capcom completely fucked up Mercenaries mode by making the maps larger, but not increasing the enemy spawn rate. The optional No Mercy difficulty had the complete opposite problem, as it throws so many enemies at you at a time, all you need to do is toss out your weaker weapons and spam your strongest attacks in order to rack up big points. You can clear any level simply by standing in place with Chris's shotgun, and occasionally turning back to shoot the enemy that spawned behind you. The Mercenaries Reunion mode is a disappointment as well, due to its lack of No Mercy mode or any new levels. They really should have just rolled the new characters into the original mode, and apparently the PlayStation 4 port does just that. Versus mode is a player versus player version of Mercenaries mode, which serves to highlight the major flaw of being unable to move and shoot. Often, you'll stand toe-to-toe with your opponent, and both of you will wind up shooting over the other's shoulders. Lost in Nightmares consists of some nice-looking but completely empty rooms, a few insultingly simple puzzles, and a walking anal wart that you get to squish with a brick. The weaponless sections and the run rather than fight design is a nice touch, but ultimately, there's nothing special about this mode. Desperate Escape pours randomized enemies recycled from the main campaign at you through a couple of new areas. The final standoff is well designed, but Josh and Jill play exactly like Chris and Sheva, save for the fact that Jill isn't black and Josh isn't a blatant homosexual. Overall, Resident Evil 5 is a competent follow-up to 4, but lacks the spirit of invention that makes 4 so great. $10 is a fair price for new players, but for everyone else looking to try out the DLC, they'll spend more than $5. If anything, Resident Evil 5 is loads of fun with a friend, but then again, so is Bukkake. And like Bukkake, it's all fun and games until you're the one getting shot in the face.
Finally, after months of putting it off, I'm ready to review the horrific first-person shooter game that everyone has been clamoring for, Resident Evil Survivor. Though, I don't know how you can call this game a first-person shooter, since you never actually shoot at 'em while playing it. In most light gun games, you might expect to find destructible environments or the ability to inflict limb-specific damage on enemies. In Resident Evil Survivor, the only thing you get to destroy is 2 hours of your life, and zombies can take more blasts to the face with a smile than Zoe Quinn on a press tour. In Survivor, you play as a half-melted Pete Rose knockoff doing his best impression of Napoleon Dynamite.
I will save these 2 kids. I swear it.
Between tracking down a boy who resembles a 40-year-old lesbian and killing 100 Mr. X clones, our amnesiac hero encounters Umbrella's greatest biological weapon of all time, the insidious Wedgevirus. Honestly, I don't know how else you could jam that much denim up an ass outside of a horrific industrial accident at the Levi's factory. All kidding aside, the enemies in Survivor are literally all up in your face, leaving precious little time for lollygagging. Occasionally, you'll enter a room with zombies standing directly beside you, but due to the limited field of view, you won't know they're there until you're suddenly taking damage and the camera pans around as though somebody from Oblivion wanted to talk to you. New enemies include blue spiders, made by adjusting the hue of regular spiders, and orangutans with guns, made by combining regular, gunless orangutans with guns. Multiple branching paths, combined with randomized enemies and the lack of mid-game saving, encourages the player to test multiple routes and avoids replays from becoming completely stale. In fact, I would go so far as to call Resident Evil Survivor a choose-your-own-adventure game, if not for the fact that the word adventure implies the existence of fun. Cutscenes appear to have been pre-rendered on an N-Gauge, and at times, objects in this game are grainier than Kansas. Luckily, pressing R1 points you towards the nearest interactive item. Unfortunately, instead of strafing with one thumbstick and looking with the other, you move exclusively with the left thumbstick, and you bring up the menu by flicking the right.
As a result, you can't strafe or move while shooting, and every now and then you'll want to look around and wind up switching to the slow-ass inventory instead. Overall, playing Resident Evil Survivor is less like uncovering a hidden gem than it is like finding a dingleberry in your bedsheets. Resident Evil Gun Survivor 2 Code Veronica Cliff Notes Edition is a light gun game with a name longer than its main campaign and more colons than a gay photo booth. Regs 2 Kv is less of a straight adaptation of the original Code Veronica game and more like someone was asked to recreate the game entirely from memory after having only played it once 10 years earlier, which probably explains why half of the original game's areas and characters are cut and why the nemesis from Resident Evil 3 shows up out of nowhere. If you take too long to clear an area, this lipless mongoloid in fetish gear moseys towards you at the speed of smell, then one hit kills your partner character, who will likely walk directly into him because they are retarded. Survivor 2 is the sort of mindless light gun game you'd play in a movie theater lobby while your mother gave the usher a handy in exchange for tickets to the latest Power Rangers movie, so be prepared to take damage the moment an area loads, deal with a useless partner who will literally pout and stand in your way, and spend more time fighting with the camera than enemies. When an enemy gets close, the camera either gets intimidated and pans down towards your shoes, ensuring you can't see where you're going, or the enemies jump directly up your booty hole where they become both invisible and invincible. Like a woman who contradicted you in public, these privileged monsters can hit you, but you cannot hit them until after you drag them home by the elbow. Oddly, despite taking half an hour to complete, this inbred bastardization of Code Veronica is almost better than the original due to the complete lack of fetch quests and penis-confusing men in dresses. In fact, my favorite improvement over the original game is so subtle that I can't help but point it out from fear that its brilliance would go unnoticed. The biggest improvement Gun Survivor 2 makes over the original Code Veronica is that the tank at the airport has 2 fish! After beating the campaign, you can waste a half hour of your life squishing bugs in roach mode or explore the fairly meaty arcade mode, which, due to its complexity and inclusion of areas and enemies cut from the story mode, should have probably just been integrated into the main campaign. Overall, if you want to know what it's like to play a game that's been half digested and pooped back out, you should probably ignore that one and do something productive with your time instead. In Resident Evil Dead Aim, the T-Virus has combined with a deadly strain of Japanese cliches aboard the world's smallest cruise ship. Only you, a balding hobo who stole clothes from Leon Kennedy's laundry bin, and Ling Ling, a Taiwanese ladyboy with a concave ass and the face of a boiled horse, can prevent Sephiroth's gay cousin from transforming into a sexually confused stingray and showing his disgusting gill-filled Hall of Thrills to impressionable children. At first, the fact that the T-Virus turned Morpheus into a Tumblr moderator with shemale pattern baldness didn't make sense to me until I looked closer and realized that Tyrant is just Tranny rearranged. Morpheus is one of the few characters in Resident Evil to inject themselves with the virus and retain the ability to speak. Most become the sort of feral grunting abominations one would normally associate with professional football players. However, being a transsexual, it is only sensible that Morpheus wouldn't know when to shut the fuck up. Other bosses include the world's most beautiful feminist and a bee. Regular enemies include blurry zombies, Michelle Obama, and a gigantic shitting butt. Morpheus's diabolical plan is to use the tranny virus to purge the world of ugly people, which is fitting considering the physical appearance of the 2 meth heads sent to kill him. Seriously, this Count Leon can barely speak English, and I can't tell if his girlfriend has Down syndrome eyes or if she's just exceptionally Chinese. This tourist-harassing pathogen of pink eye is so ugly that frankly, I'm glad the mirrors don't work in this game. On the positive side, the lighting engine effectively creates a modicum of atmosphere, and the controls work fine, incorporating a quick turn, a passable dodge mechanic, and the ability to move freely while shooting. Ammo is intelligently dispersed, allowing the player to occasionally max out on free handgun bullets, and alternately drop excess handgun rounds when better ammunition is available. Though the light gun functionality is disabled in the American release, the first-person aiming works fine, save for when the enemies get in close, and the analog sticks become interchangingly too sensitive and not sensitive enough. Environment interaction is limited to a couple of explosive boxes scattered throughout the game, for seemingly no apparent reason. There's a stealth element that allows you to creep past certain enemies, but since there's basically no enemy AI, you can just run past everything instead. In the 3 hours that dead aim lasts, you'll have a little bit of fun. It isn't a terrible game, just a terribly stupid one. In fact, the most interesting bits of the writing come at the end when 1. Morpheus, like all transsexuals, dies due to complications with his booty hole, and 2. When you realize that Dead Aim is a canonical entry to the Resident Evil franchise. At the end of Resident Evil 6, Chris Redfield's life partner Piers Morgan injects himself with the same electric she-male juice Morpheus utilizes to prolong his life. Whether or not Piers reappears later in the series as a jizz-juggling jellyfish who enjoys performing baths to mouth is entirely dependent on if the writers find some unholy Eldritchian ritual to somehow become even stupider than they were while writing Resident Evil Dead Maim. Well, that's it for today's video. If you liked it, you can subscribe, tweet about it, kidnap some illegal aliens at the border and force them to watch it on an endless loop in your secret basement. Use the links provided in the description of this video to check out my original paperbacks, ebooks, and audiobooks, join my Discord, or sign up for my Patreon in exchange for the right to vote on which game I'll make my next video essay about. Until then, thanks for your time and goodbye! Part 6, Resident Evil 6, released in 2012. Let me just start off by saying Resident Evil 6's Mercenaries mode is fun, and if somebody invites you over for Resident Evil 6 and chill, you should either trick them into playing that mode instead, or skip straight into sucking their dick, Loretta. I don't need to hear about your sister's children, especially not about that one that looks just like me. Usually in these reviews, I focus primarily on gameplay, but the writing in Resident Evil 6 is so bad and so obtrusive to the gameplay that it merits extra attention. Leon Kennedy, who has inexplicably traded his sense of humor for one of Eddie Murphy's old leather jackets, stumbles through a campaign so generic it literally comes in a pack of pho. For no good reason, Leon brings along a woman that isn't really even a person, and I don't mean that in the capacity that women in general aren't people. In this case, I mean that Helena is a glorified plot device. Her role boils down to fucking up enough that Leon has to fix everything, and after hours of bullshitting, to reveal the name of the primary antagonist, who appears so seldom that he might as well not even be in the game. Simmons' boss fights are particularly moronic, as he changes to a bear, to a dinosaur, to some kind of scorpion monster, and then a giant fly over the course of a dozen stages, including vehicle sections and QuickTime events, none of which are satisfying since most players won't even know who the fuck he is or why they're fighting him in the first place. Chris Redfield returns following his exploits in Resident Evil 5, watches an intern turn into a burnt Dorito with legs, and is pushed over the brink and into the drink as a result. Then, thanks to the support of professional prostate playmate Piers, whom is destined to die the moment Chris names him as a worthy successor, Chris pulls out of his depression and continues to eat alone at a shitty bar, all while ignoring Jill's phone calls because the one time that they finally did fuck, Jill jammed her thumb up Chris's booty hole and he liked it a little bit too much. Jake Mueller literally has no reason to exist. He is supposed to be Wesker's bastard son with special antibodies that can create a cure for the new C virus, but children inherit antibodies from their mother, and Wesker wouldn't have even come into contact with the T virus at the time Jake was conceived. The entire concept of him having special blood is made redundant by the presence of his partner Sherry, who not only has special G virus antibodies, but a bang instead of titties to boot. A very weak attempt is made to pit Chris and Jake against each other, but their interaction boils down to Chris basically saying, "Hey kid, your dad was the biggest cunt on the planet, and since cunts gross me out, I dropped him into a conveniently placed volcano," and Jake being surprisingly okay with it. Jake seems to exist solely so the developers could include him in a future action game, but at this point in the series with 7 numbered games and a dozen spin-offs, do we really need more characters? Look, Pierce dies, and I can appreciate that, but he was created for Resident Evil 6 just so he could die in place of an established character. He's like one of those illegitimate children Bill Clinton makes with waitresses just so they can be sacrificed to Molech in exchange for 2 more weeks of functioning white blood cells. All the problems solved in Resident Evil 6 are introduced in Resident Evil 6, causing a net gain of 0. The one stab the writers make towards actual overarching plot progression turns out to be a complete bait and switch. If you are a complete fucking retard, you will not notice that there's a second Ada Wong running around in a blue dress. And you might be tempted to believe that Ada actually received some characterizations beyond being a receptacle for testicle projectiles. Instead, a pencil-neck dweeb who's seen too many saucy source filmmaker videos of Ada creates an Ada clone from the living body of a character that otherwise only exists in crib notes, and that clone is the one that fucks over Chris and gets killed instead. It is such a pointless and convoluted plotline that it comes off like a leftover write-up for one of those shitty live-action Resident Evil movies, which I should point out only exists because a Hollywood pedophile was caught importing a child prostitute from Russia and had to concoct an elaborate film career for her to throw the police off of his trail. And no, I am not making that up. Embarrassingly bad writing aside, there is some decent gameplay to be found between the cutscenes and annoying QuickTime events. The player now has a regenerating stamina bar which governs the usage of special abilities. The quick shot is a nice addition to the formula, allowing the player to shoot any nearby enemy instantly without aiming in exchange for an increment of stamina. Melee attacks are now independent of the knife, eats up stamina points, and can instantly kill most downed enemies. The weapon upgrading system of previous games is gone. In its place, you get an ability system that restricts you to just 3 upgrades that are generally along the lines of increase drop rate of X items by X%, or do X% more damage to X type of enemies. Weapons have kick, but there is no penalty for shooting while moving, and backwards strafing becomes a little bit too easy as a result. Boss fights are especially underwhelming since bosses either run away after you've shot them enough times, or will only die following an incredibly convoluted series of QuickTime events. At least in Resident Evil 5, when a giant caterpillar bat attacked me in a subterranean low-income housing project, I had the satisfaction of killing it myself. It didn't run away 15 times, only to get killed in a QuickTime event where I dropped 5 boxes on it, burn it with lava twice, then shoot it in the face at point-blank range. The addition of player-controlled enemies is a nice addition that ramps up the difficulty in a few places. Most of the fun I had during the campaign came from these moments where I was either invaded repeatedly by a bunch of Russian assholes, and again when I ruined this one guy's day and refused to let him proceed. AI-controlled enemies, however, are just a little bit underwhelming. A single Crimson Head standing alone at the end of a hallway with his back towards you, staring out of a window and lamenting, is infinitely more unsettling than a dozen screeching C-virus zombies running towards you in a wide open space. The gun-wielding Javo break any sense of tension by sprouting stupid-ass cricket legs and spider butts that are just fucking out of place. The chainsaw enemies in Resident Evil 4 and 5 invoked dread because they were heard before they were seen, and you could never tell which direction they were coming from. The chainsaw would rev in the distance, and you'd only have a couple of seconds to get ready. Typical of most of the special enemies in Resident Evil 6, the Resident Evil 6 chainsaw enemy is introduced via a really stupid cutscene. It jumps right in front of you, it says ooga booga booga, pulled out his dick, and you can't run away from it, and you can't kill it, you gotta fight it like 18 times. It's fucking retarded. Aside from the one titty elemental that has the same scream as the ghoul from the movie House, I can't remember the distinct sound made by a particular enemy in 6, and I just finished playing it yesterday. In contrast, I can still remember the zombie groans from the original PlayStation game, the shriek of hunters, and the distinct thumping of the giant tarantulas. You know what else would have been nice? If you're gonna base your game's plot on the idea of a sad boy cloning his dream girls and making monsters by mistake, why don't you make the failed experiments look a little bit like women? Silent Hill 2 had a good success with monsters that resembled busty nurses, a woman with 2 vaginas but no blah 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 hole, and walk in beds with metaphorical molestation occurring under the sheet. Since there's no theme to the enemies in Resident Evil 6, I could not bring myself to care about them. While having a second person in the room helps cut the suffering in half, I made a point of playing most of the game alone in order to test the balance in the partner AI, and also so I could have my cock and balls hanging out, because most people don't like that. Unfortunately, the AI partner has been dumbed down for the sake of people too stupid to figure out shove his AI, and partner characters no longer take damage, they can't die anymore, they no longer pick up or use ammunition, they will not pick up ammunition and give it to you, but they still ruin the atmosphere by talking constantly. The level layout is generally a clusterfuck, made worse by the poor lighting and the tile sets that make every area on a given map look the same. To alleviate this, the developers put an annoying quest marker on the screen that you cannot turn off, and you can even press a button that puts a literal arrow pointing in the direction you're supposed to go. Often, a quest marker will appear and reveal the location of keys before you even know that you need to get keys. The style of gameplay changes slightly from one campaign to the next. However, since the campaigns are all intertwined, you'll wind up in recycled areas with recycled enemies so often that the campaigns begin to blur. Generally speaking, Leon's campaign starts with a fuck ton of really stupid ass QuickTime events, followed by increasingly larger hordes of zombies, then a bunch of bosses that you fight on moving platforms and can only kill via QuickTime events. In particular, a fight with a Frankenfish comes to mind, where you fight him on a gigantic slip and slide, and you kill it by shooting a barrel of gunpowder that fell into its mouth out of nowhere for absolutely no reason, and really is closer to you than to the fish and it should blow you up, but it doesn't. Chris's campaign is a little bit better. It switches between really dull fights between gun-wielding enemies and some fairly well done segments against giant mutants. Jake and Sherry tend to run out of ammo, and they have an expanded melee option as a result. Unfortunately, they have the most recycled areas that when you play following Leon and Chris's campaign, it'll come off as a bit of a chore, and their exclusive areas are the least polished in the game. Ada in general has the tightest campaign, with the least amount of QuickTime events, recycled monsters, and god-awful cutscenes. Plus, the only time Resident Evil 6 even attempts to be a horror game occurs at the end of Ada's campaign, and if the entire game had been modeled on that segment style, it would have been terrific. As I mentioned at the start, Mercenaries mode is the best part of the game, as it cuts out all the bullshit and just leaves you with some fun gameplay. No Mercy mode returns even crazier than it was in Resident Evil 5, and if you have the right DLC, you'll even get some characters and monsters from Left 4 Dead 2 thrown in. I would review the other DLC modes, but over the course of a week, I couldn't get a single match up and running, so don't expect to get much play out of them either. Single player matchmaking worked fairly well, and single screen multiplayer functioned for me without a hitch. Overall, Resident Evil 6 feels like somebody dissected a better game and tried to reassemble it in the dark with oven mitts on and their penis out, which is unfortunate for the series as a whole. There are more bad Resident Evil games at this point than there are good, and if Capcom had any sense, Resident Evil 7 would have no connection with previous games. Thanks for your time, and boom, motherfucker!
Revelations does for the Resident Evil franchise what silicone titties do for a 50-year-old woman. Sure, I'll play with them for a while, but I'm not exactly having fun, and I'll never be able to eat Grand's cookies without fresh milk ever again! Jill Valentine, whose face seems to have been carved from a holiday ham, stars in Revelations despite having no connection to the plot. Parker's attachment to the events at Terra Grigia make him an obvious candidate for the protagonist, while Ada Wong's understudy Jessica would have served better in Jill's place. I know storytelling was never Resident Evil's strong suit, but there is so little gameplay content in Revelations that the story becomes that much more important as a result. Jill and Parker, then Chris and Jessica explore identical abandoned cruise ships. Two sets of characters explore mountains recycled from 1080 snowboarding. Two flashback scenes take place in an office, first traveling from the ground floor to the roof, then again from the roof back to the ground floor, while bringing a constipated Conan O'Brien along for the ride. Gameplay is a refined version of the Resident Evil 5 formula. You can finally move and shoot, but the reticle doesn't bounce when running, which makes firing while retreating way too easy. Running is now tied to the analog stick, so your right thumb is free to rotate the camera or play with your nipples. The A button has been remapped for a dodging mechanic that occasionally works. Like Stephen Hawking's, enemies react robotically to being shot in the legs, so if you aren't shooting for the head, you might as well be shooting a load on the floor, which I'm okay with. The T-Abyss virus enemies aren't rotting zombies, and a single ooze mutant can suck Jill dry faster than my Jewish ex-wife in divorce court. Unfortunately, like my Jewish ex-wife, the partner mechanic seems to have been mysteriously dismembered in a bathtub in New Jersey. Your AI partner can no longer die, and while they have infinite ammunition, they are completely worthless in a fight. If you thought Shever refusing to shoot Wesker in the back was infuriating, wait until Chris spends the entire final boss fight standing in a corner while shooting the air. It is also worth noting that, like a man your girlfriend insulted, every enemy in the game ignores your partner and attacks you directly instead. T-Abyss mutants include 4 types of drowned people: Biggie Smalls, My Foreskin, frogs that disintegrate when you punch them, Lamprey Lucy with the juicy sushi pussy, Jennifer Hepler after an all-night spaghetti dinner, and a couple of street sharks. The weapon system refined the upgrade process from 5, allowing you to swap upgrades between similar weapons, which keeps weapons viable longer and allows for a greater deal of customization. You can now move while using the knife, which activates with a single button press. Unfortunately, the knife does little damage, which is a shame since making the knife viable would have allowed the devs to be stingier with ammunition and made Jill play more like the Puerto Rican transsexual she's modeled after. A great deal of praise has been heaped upon Revelations for enemies no longer dropping ammunition, but scanning for ammo in every room slows the game to a crawl. If not for the recycled areas, lengthy cutscenes, and slow as molasses running down my ass's scanning mechanic, Revelations would have taken 4 hours to beat and would have probably been a better game for it. Overall, Revelations is like making hot, salty love to a reverse mermaid from Innsmouth. The fish knish is delish, but you'll have to ignore all the nasty bits to have a thrill between the gills. Welcome to the family, son. It's your good old pal EmptyHero, and today, in the somber afterglow of my red-hot CPU, we're going to discuss the first great thing to come out of the Resident Evil franchise since the invention of Sheva Alamar's bodaciously bounceable brown Betty booty and source filmmaker pornography. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, also known as All in the Family Once You Go Black Your Fist Smells Like Crack edition, stretches the Resident Evil formula further than my dick that one time I tried to stop myself from falling backwards down the emergency escape stairs of a pediatric cancer ward by snaking my foreskin around a banister, to the point where some players will wonder if this is even Resident Evil anymore. Gameplay is cribbed from modern touchstones of atmospheric horror like Outlast, Amnesia, and John Podesta's home movies, while the premise borrows themes and iconography from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Silent Hill 2, and a short story I was working on, of which I have no idea how the fuck Capcom found out about. But more on that later. Modern gamers, or as I like to call them, blithering consumerist whores who have only taken to the hobby because they have nothing better to do with their lives, between the releases of soulless superhero movies, Fortnite dance lessons, and pretending not to hear when their parents argue in the kitchen at night, tend to forget that Capcom was always in the habit of reinventing Resident Evil as the franchise went stale, and never shied from copying the ideas of their Western counterparts. Which, to be honest, is only fair considering all the times I peered over the knobby shoulders of my Asian peers to copy their test answers, breathe in the sweet aroma of their Pete Rose hair, and get a better look at their mediocre rice milk-laden titties. From the setting to the puzzles and interface, the original Resident Evil was a blatant clone of Alone in the Dark. Various sequels refined and complicated this borrowed formula until it culminated in Resident Evil Code Veronica, a glorified fetch quest so mundane and by the numbers that players might as well have saved themselves $50 and experienced the equivalent amount of fun by organizing the tissue papers on the floor of a porn theater by viscosity while only using their tongue. As a result, a series of experimental games followed that were either too unique to call Resident Evil and became original properties to themselves like Devil May Cry, Onimusha, and Haunting Ground, or they were so goddamned awful that they were given subtitles rather than that coveted title of Resident Evil 4, and released more quietly than a subtly ironic hummus fart in church during a moment of silence for a local family who recently perished in their sleep due to a gas leak. Once the official 4th Resident Evil hit shelves, the games that followed continued to refine and tweak its gameplay systems until, like the disgusting protruding nipples of a cross-dressing Californian grade schooler tweaked one too many times by a whiskey-breathed Jew producer between commercials at the Ellen DeGeneres show, Capcom released the metaphysical equivalent of steaming hot reconstituted soy milk onto the masses. Resident Evil 6 had 4 main campaigns, each in a different style with unique enemies and assets, developed by completely separate teams, and as a result, every aspect of those highly polished, highly developed, and group designed campaigns were complete and utter failures, devoid of any sense of quality control or essential theme. Perhaps this is most demonstrable by looking into 6's array of downloadable multiplayer modes, of which you'll have an easier time dressing up like one of the magical item boxes from the original Resident Evil trilogy and asking strangers at the free clinic to reach inside and play with your crank, than against you in a Resident Evil 6 online multiplayer match. Again, a slew of horrible spin-off games followed until Capcom pulled their collective heads out of their asses just long enough for a gulp of air. As a result, Resident Evil 7 takes a step back in terms of scale, focusing on the fine details instead. Instead of Antifa members chasing you with the farm tools that they have no idea what else to do with after they've already murdered all the white African farmers, or hundreds of zombified strangers who cross your path on their way to vote for Democrats. Resident Evil 7 pits players against small groups of silent killers and the occasional super enemy with a unique, emotional connection to the protagonist and the plot. While Silent Hill 2 didn't have the balls to make the player enact the O.J. Simpson method of divorce until the final boss fight, Resident Evil 7 literally begins with the protagonist stepping over his absent bride's shit bucket, following her through a hoarder's house just long enough to practice using the "Daddy no" button, before she turns around and, thanks to the world's worst yeast infection, does her best impression of the radiator lady from Eraserhead and demands that you give her space by chopping off your left arm so you can more easily jerk off with it while not feeling like you're doing it yourself. And frankly, Mamma Mia, a rubber glove full of grape jelly warmed up atop the toaster could have done the job just as easily. You thoughtless bitch! Luckily, there's some Mountain Dew to pour on your hemorrhaging stump. And even though you hit your wife with more axe than a black guy heading out for a long night of drinking, dancing, and stabbing unattended white women in the ass with a fork on the subway, this is the one time you can tell your neighbors she just hurt herself by walking into a wall and not feel like a complete liar. At this point, it's pretty safe to assume that major spoilers await ahead. So if you're the type of person to click on a comprehensive Resident Evil 7 video essay without having actually played it, maybe you should take a moment to reassess what exactly the fuck it is you're doing with your life. In this, the first Resident Evil since Zero to actually feature a relevant residence and irreverent resident that presents an evil presence within that residence, who just so happens to be an inverted roly-poly loly stromboli, but more on that later. Players assume the persona of Ethan, Patient Zero for the dreaded one-itis virus, in search of his missing own-a-whole life support unit, into the world's most luxurious Louisiana flophouse beheld since the cabin the Clintons had hastily built over the mass graves of uncountable Haitian children. There, Ethan finds that he is not the first schmuck lured in by the false promise of free jambalaya and a complete absence of Jews. Photographs, notes, and videos reveal that some of the previous trespassers of the Baker's estate were either brainwashed into joining an insect-styled hive mind family, so interconnected that Mia can tell when Jack is coming just from sensing his presence and probably also from the stench of hot shrimp emitting from the front of his shit-encrusted trousers. Others were forced to eat out a girl on her period until a blood clot passed from her cervix through his mouth and into his brain, and perhaps worst of all, most were transformed into mindless, shiftless watermelon disposal units. After surviving yet another attempt by Margaret to force a young man to eat her guts out, and realizing that people lose hands in this game more often than a Skywalker playing blackjack, our hero Ethan is faced with the moral dilemma of whether or not to allow the Bakers to infest his neg hole with an intestinal egg roll. Realizing that joining the Baker's family would make his wife Mia his in-real-life sister, thus rendering their bedroom roleplay entirely pointless, Ethan decides to make a break for it instead, after encountering the world's dumbest policeman who, instead of immediately helping you escape or calling for backup, decides to interrogate you further by breaking into the Baker's home and playing the classic mind game of good cop, dead cop. Then, witnessing firsthand Jack's amazing ability to force a car to accelerate despite the fact that he is in no way interacting with the gas pedal, Ethan discovers the horrifying secret that the Baker's basement is infested with black mold! How anyone can stand to breathe in that environment without puking their lungs up is beyond me, although this game takes place in a sub-sea level swamp in Louisiana, so the idea that the Bakers would have a basement in the first place is complete nonsense. Yet, this is the same game that tricked everyone into accepting the ridiculous notion that you can retroactively unlock doors you've previously seen to be locked by watching an interactive VHS cassette and having the person in the tape unlock the door for you in the past, so who the fuck cares? Other breaks in logic include using elaborate shadow puppets to open secret passages rather than just blotting out the entire light with your dick, and open doors by equaling out a scale based on the weight of a lantern that is currently lit, causing part of its weight to constantly escape as a vapor, thus rendering its equivalence to the other lantern impossible, when you could just as easily have pulled on the visibly exposed pulley system that works the door locking mechanism, or removed the pre-existing lantern, thus rendering both sides of the scale equal by default. Well, after helping Jack cut out a couple of teratomas and stumbling upon an apt visual metaphor for the fruits of feminism, you know, a lifeless fetus in a musty old box, Ethan gets to fight a lanky Kong-armed hag who queefs hornets at him from her honey bunches of throats, proving Homer Simpson correct when he so aptly opined, "The bee bit my bottom, now my bottom big!" And to be honest, Marge's tenacity, pussy that chews bees, and tendency to perish in a hole beneath the floorboards of my living room reminds me a lot of my first wife. Miss you, babe. Mwah. For some reason, Ethan decides to follow up on this victory against the elderly by making his fist do its best impression of a pickled pig's foot in Jewish propaganda by cramming it down a black man's throat. At this point, players are meant to collaborate with their support character Zoe, but encounter the douchiest Lucas, since George spilled vinaigrette dressing all over his flannel shirt while trying to figure out how to fit Jar Jar Binks on the label instead. Lucas Baker is legitimately the biggest prick in the series, and the only member of the Baker family whose evil predates his encounter with the true antagonist. Just how bored was Lucas before Eveline came into his life to facilitate his sadistic schemes? Well, I'll give you a clue. All this lettering that glows under a black light didn't come from a phosphorescent spray. That's some straight up taint paint, my dude.
It's no wonder Lucas is so bald and skinny. His body's been converting all of his muscle, fat, and hair into gonad gumbo for years. Holding Zoe and Mia hostage, Lucas forces Ethan to undertake a series of trials, but ultimately, his games get everything wrong. For one, happy birthday, says this cake. Unhappy death night is more like it. And even this clown knows that forearm tattoos are for losers, but gives you one anyways, despite knowing full well that it violates your company's corporate conduct policy and will ultimately get you fired. The entire plot thread involving Lucas just kind of evaporates until the DLC, so let's move on. Jack comes back as a greasy Chinese food shit with corn niblets for eyes, proving once and for all that you can't off Jack. A Jack offer? You? I think not. After shooting Jack in the eyes more often than I did back when I was young, and could knock the blades off a ceiling fan if I held in my load long enough, Ethan is faced with a terrible decision. Does he use the cure for whatever the fuck it is that is wrong with everyone on his wife, whom he is legally allowed to have the sex with, but would probably feel weird about fucking since she has an elderly woman with the mind of a preteen girl trapped inside of her, making her into what John Madden would probably affectionately refer to as a turfuckin'? Does he use it on Zoe for no justifiable reason and get the bad ending instead, or does he leave them both tied up and squeeze all four of them titties for about a minute? No matter how the player acts, what follows is yet another installment in Resident Evil's obsession with big fucking boats. A final VHS cassette-based flashback that oddly contains more revelations than the entirety of Resident Evil Revelations, and a stream full of fish that gave up on life after realizing they'll never smell as bad as Mia's pussy. While running through the salt mines and learning the truth about Evelyn may cause some players to feel sympathy for the girl, remember, she is evil Lynn, not good Lynn. I mean, come on people, it's right there in the name. Besides, she mocks you by using a big head cheat mode at the end, so feel free to cap that bitch like she has information that could lead to the arrest of a Clinton. Now before we move on to my final thoughts and shilling my social media links and novels, let's take a moment to address the slew of downloadable content available for Resident Evil. The Daughters DLC means to explain how exactly Evelyn took control of the Baker family. Unfortunately, the writers kind of forgot that the main campaign states that this process took several weeks, and in this DLC, everything goes to shit faster than a gay proctologist's fist. The only real value in this 10-minute long quest for event flags is the revelation that Marguerite has all those centipedes in her mouth because Jack forced her to drink some of the bath water left over from the last time Brianna Wu came over and hosed down the festering axe wound where his inadequate penis once resided. The 21 DLC presents an interesting take on blackjack mixed with Uno and plagiarizing Saw. However, the fact that you somehow get your fingers cut off by flimsy razor blades powered only by their own weight, and that Clancy doesn't just take apart the mechanism with his free hand completely broke my suspension of disbelief. Luckily, so long as you can avoid experiencing the last thing a pizza or back alley bye-bye baby sees, you'll only need 3 fingers to perform the shocker. The Bedroom DLC continues Clancy and the player's suffering with the hardest puzzle since that time I painted my genital warts different colors and challenged my students to solve my extra special Pubix cubes. Seriously now, why exactly would the bakers make it so that they have to arrange paintings in a certain order, then look at some forks and kill a bunch of spiders to open their own closet door? What if Marge felt some liquid shit dripping down the back of her leg and had to get to the Depends locked in that closet quickly? And why doesn't Clancy just kick a hole between the wall beams where it's just drywall? He can already see how flimsy the wall is by the hole in it. And Jack and Mia burst through walls like a Mongolian Kool-Aid man all the fucking time. And perhaps the most troubling fault with the Bedroom DLC is that, in order to escape the horrific fate of ingesting Indian food, you literally stab Marge in the neck and make her run for it, which you could have done the moment she handed Clancy cutlery at the beginning of the DLC.
I can only assume that, being godless nips, the developers at Capcom assumed our Western spoons, forks, and knives to be as blunt and as non-threatening as their chopsticks and pixelated dicks. The Nightmare DLC is basically Mercenaries mode with resource management instead of item drops, and to be perfectly honest, as much fun as I had while playing this mode, if I wanted to shoot a bunch of greasy black people in my basement, I wouldn't have stopped storing my bicycle down there. Ethan Must Die is a Binding of Isaac-inspired challenge mode where players spawn in the baker's courtyard with only a Puerto Rican credit card and a dwindling resistance to despair. Weapons, healing items, and ammo spawn from crates that have a nasty habit of exploding in your face harder than all 4 hours of work Capcom put into developing Umbrella Corps, and while enemies appear in set locations, you'll rarely have the equipment needed to face them, forcing the player to run face first into traps like a sexually confused product of single mother parenthood at his first anime convention, then die instantly. If you both love a challenge and hate yourself, feel free to give Nightmare Mode a shot, then contact a psychiatrist because frankly, you're a better person than you realize and should love yourself as much as the rest of us love you. In Jack's 55th birthday, also known as Hungry Hungry Psychos, Mia utilizes the power of Team Fortress 2 hats to subdue Jack's insatiable bloodlust just long enough to get him to eat the swamps and chicken dinners scattered around the map, rather than Mia's inadequate ass for a change, which is also a nice change for Jack considering that, even though he's the one dressed like a clown, Mia's cooch tastes funny. Apparently, the Not a Hero DLC takes place on opposite day, as Umbrella is portrayed as a private military bent on eradicating biological weapons, and Chris Redfield is some kind of twiggy soy boy who has to procure his own steroids on site rather than bringing his own. This new incarnation of Chris carries a great arsenal of weapons, but for no justifiable reason, no gas mask or flashlight into a sub-terrarian mine. And if you don't get what I mean, that's like Bill going down on Hillary without smearing some of his own Big Mac infused shit on his upper lip so he doesn't have to suffer the otherworldly stench of her pussy. Now, enemies in this DLC include those little roly-poly monsters from Dead Space, Lucas as a tyrant, and a slightly larger mold monster with extra cheese. This DLC was pretty well put together, and frankly, aside from Remake, this is the first time Chris appeared in a game without coming off as a complete fucking spaz, so I'm okay with the changes. The final DLC, End of Zoe, also known as Metal Gear Squalid Crocodile Punter, begins with Zoe's drunkle snapping the necks of the Umbrella team sent to rescue Zoe because he heard one of them using math to calculate their position and assumed that they were Jews. With Eveline gone, the mutations of the Baker family and mold monsters kick into overdrive, granting certain enemies increased ferocity due to their newfound inability to pump off anymore with their newly grown blade arms, causes the crystal meth residue and decades worth of incestual cum soaked into Zoe's skin to transmogrify into a sort of rudimentary jiggly bits chrysalis and poon cocoon, and enables that top corner of Jack's head that he blew off in the garage to respawn as a shameless Swamp Thing clone. Gameplay involves fisting more black monstrosities than Jim Norton on date night, eating out more critters than a furry left alone in an animal shelter after dark, chucking spears like somebody on the development team forgot that this is a Resident Evil game and not what blacks want to do instead of standing for the national anthem at sporting events, playing chicken with 10-foot alligators rather than just climbing up into the nearby tall grass out of fear of the demonic Pokemon his pastor warned him about just before handing out the holy vision snakes, and punching holes in walls like daddy after drinking because mommy is just too goddamn nimble to catch with a solid punch once the meth kicks in. Luckily, someone at Neo Umbrella just so happened to drop a hydraulic boxing glove near the final boss, perfect for fisting a robotic waifu, like Haiti,
Dorothy from the Big O, and that one slutty toaster I store in the same cubby as my rubber glove full of grape jelly. And as a result, Uncle Joe gets to inject his niece with something other than his own DNA for a change. Overall, while Resident Evil 7 isn't exactly emblematic of the previous entries of the franchise, it, like watershed installments such as the original Resident Evil, remake, and 4 before it, charts a new trajectory for the series, and frankly, I appreciate the changes. It was nice to play as somebody who felt real and frustrated with their situation, rather than as yet another immortal anime character who performs gun fu, wears a $200 jacket, and never gets laid. As far as the writing is concerned, Resident Evil scenarios and dialogue are generally embarrassingly bad, and this time around, about halfway through the game, I had to dig into my folder of unfinished writing projects and realize that a short story that I plot outlined 10 years ago was completely scooped by this game. After eliminating similar characters and plot lines from my little story, only the introductory sequence, location details, and a few quips remained. So as far as I'm concerned, if the writer of 7 was good enough to force me to rewrite one of my own projects, it's knocked out of the park. Gameplay-wise, 7 introduces a clever blocking mechanic that makes the lack of peripheral vision inherent in first-person games manageable, and refines the item crafting system introduced in Resident Evil 3. Items are scattered in clever hiding spots, like in BioShock, and though, like a fecal-philiac marching into the forest intending to live off the land, your character walks around with 3 backpacks full of shit, you'll never feel overpowered or too ill-equipped to continue. Graphically, Resident Evil 7 makes PT look like TP and that you could wipe your ass with it, thanks to literally hiring the guy who made the engine for PT, as well as a liberal use of ray tracing, though I sometimes wonder, why do these games utilize ray tracing and not Bob tracing or Jamal tracing? Well, that's it for today's video. If you liked it, be a kawaii babe and subscribe. Share it with your dwindling supply of friends who have not yet been banned from Twitter for no apparent reason. Use the links provided below to join my Discord so you can annoy me with unfunny personal messages at all hours of the day. Check out one of my ebooks, paperbacks, or audiobooks in order to expand both your mind and genitalia. Toss $1 at me on Patreon for the right to vote on which game I review next, or clasp hands with everyone else and join me in an earnest prayer that the Resident Evil 2 remake doesn't turn out to be as soulless of an embarrassment in the vein of Resident Evil 6 that the previews make it out to be. Until then, thanks for your time and goodbye! Hey everybody, it's your good old pal EmptyHero, and today, because I was so enamored by Resident Evil Village, also known as H.P. Lovecraft's The Shadow over Ass to Mouth, I'm gonna take a brief break from streaming myself losing at video games designed for small children so that we can ponder the greatest questions of our generation. No, not whether nutting in raviolis then putting them back in the fridge makes you a semen saucier for shooting your skeety inside the ziti, but rather such poignant tribulations of our times as was Ethan's family life with the soup-making, Blumpkin-loving imposter Miranda, healthier than his marriage to the oh-so-she-walked into adorable original Mamma Mia, and perhaps most fedora-tippingly of all, was Miranda's attempt to cope with her egglessness by kidnapping and mutating other people's children into mindless monsters who only know how to consume, a metaphor for feminism as a whole, or simply the natural result of the matriarchy that she imposed on the titular village. While gamers understand what points, levels, and bad guys are, we often fail to heed the softly whispered desires of the game's developers. Resident Evil games of late fall into what fat, unkissable products of repeated child molestation often refer to as male power fantasies.
Chris Redfield is a roided up 13-year-old boy who does to Black Lives Matter protesters what literally everyone who pays an income tax would like to do to Black Lives Matter protesters. Leon Kennedy is a quip-spewing master of kung fu who can backflip over a zombie and nut in his pants 3 times by thinking of a tsundere flat-assed Asian woman before landing. Ethan Winters, however, fulfills the developer's truest and most difficult to fulfill desire, to go home and become a family man. Now, let's unplug the joke machine for just a second, babes. Being unmarried in your 30s is like being one lightning bug alone in a field at night. It has even become a running joke with fans that Chris's mission in life is to find someone, anyone, to fuck his sister so that he can continue his family line. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Mia Winters was a flat-assed, butter-faced bitch in Resident Evil 7, but unlike you fools, Ethan Winters knows the answer to the riddle of steel. That even a narrow-behind, broomstick of a woman will plump up all voluptuous and grab from behindable once you put a baby in her against her will. Pregnancy creates a wide-backed woman with the sort of succulent mother-bearing knees that'll make you say, "Oh my God," so enthusiastically that even the Lord Jesus would peer down from his cloud and finna bust a nut. Hallelujah! The Village of Shadows, which, appropriately enough, bookends our tale, warns of society's corruption of young white girls. First, by tempting them away from their family with the promise of juicy berries and thought accoutrement, only to imbue them with stanky fish flaps and a pause load instead. Thank Yeshua HaMashiach that the last beast the girl in our story encountered was a mechanical horse and not a mechanical dog. Otherwise, that golden cog she took might have been a ruby red knot instead. This hackneyed plot device serves to lay out the basic premise of the game, but if you put on your "it was real in my mind" yarmulke, you'll realize that, as a family man, the only thing that could possibly spoil Ethan's familial bliss is the ever-present threat of his daughter growing up to become a smut. Now, hold on just a second, guys. I'm feeling a bit of a rumbling in my tumbling. Oh, it's delicious. Whew. Now, if you sophisticated gentlemen will pardon my momentary impropriety, I require but a moment to evacuate my bowels upon my porcelain chamber of woe. Whew! Hey, speaking of disposing of unwanted lumps of bodily waste, did anyone else find it weird that the first mission of Resident Evil Village is to ditch your baby so you can drink red wine with a woman who isn't your wife? Who does Ethan Winters think he is? My dad? For that matter, who does Rose Winters think she is? Passing out in a homemade sweater while covered in powdered milk farts. Me after being raped by my Alzheimer's-stricken, yet unbelievably strong grandmother? There was also literally no reason for Chris and his highly trained team of unarmed white women exterminators to not just let Miranda continue pretending to be Mia. Perhaps they were simply trying to spare Ethan the horrors of ethnic food. Miranda's cœur de légumes is Polish for a whale's vagina after all, though if nothing else I can appreciate that Resident Evil Village allows me to punctuate an argument with the death of my wife without having to pretend to be unable to put on a glove afterwards. Chris then snatches up Ethan's baby like a delivery boy for Comet Ping Pong Pizza, and the first part of our overly long intro concludes. Ethan, proving that he has truly acclimated to the Polish way of life, awakens behind a flipped car and immediately steals somebody's phone. The way he stumbles drunkenly through the snowy forest reminds me of my childhood. After my parents sold their car to pay for gasoline, I had to walk 15 miles uphill through the snow every morning to get to finishing school. If I wanted to keep my knees warm,
which is what I walked on since my family was too poor to afford feet. I had to find a fresh bear shit to kneel in, and believe you me, being knee-deep in a bear's hairy shit isn't nearly as fun as those guys in California might have you believe. And don't let this friendly little bungee jumping crow fool you, there is no safety for Ethan in the cabin ahead. Someone or something smashed up the place and left it slathered with bodily fluids like a me in the night. Can you imagine Ethan's terror entering an abandoned building while ferocious subhumans surround him like a real estate agent showing off a home in Detroit? After reuniting with our good old pal, the recycled asset bolt cutter, we finally meet our first villager. You may initially suspect that he's an American due to him speaking perfect English and casually gifting Ethan a pistol, but if you ponder deeper, dream just a little, you will realize that this villager can't possibly be American. Otherwise, he would not have shot at a home intruder without pausing to worry about whether or not a certain hue of urban folk might taint the jury pool at his pending trial. This brief shootout ends when our friendly NPC breaks through the glass ceiling like a woman who knows how to suck cock, and Ethan is banished to the basement like literally anybody who is watching this video. A wolfman then appears and bites off the two fingers that reminded him most of Miranda, and in my humble opinion, this is the most tragic loss of two fingers since that time I took a wrong turn and my whiskey tumbler smashed through my windshield and into some pedestrian's face. An onslaught of greasy village people then ensues, and not the kind of sensual, oiled-up village people you might read about on Chris Redfield's DeviantArt page, but rather the terrible kind that doesn't even know how to harmonize.
Hello? 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 Hello?
These lichen enemies are a play on words, wherein a lichen can refer to a half-man, half-wolf, while a lichen refers to the fusion of a moth and a fungus, which makes perfect sense once you consider that hobos are known worldwide for their skin fungus. Why, in my own youth, I once saw a homeless man so infested with mold that he had a huge pink mushroom growing right out of his pants that spat spores all over my face. The world's least annoying Hasidic Jew then appears and smites Ethan's moldy foreskin with his humongous Hebrew hammer until players realize that Ethan used to be a horror game protagonist just like Leon or Jill until he took an arrow to the knee. Luckily, this is the exact moment that all the monsters decided to Fortnite dance over Ethan instead of killing him outright. I can only assume that they then caught a plume of steam emanating from the backside of a small chihuahua in heat, or heard the enticing rustle of somebody opening a fresh pack of bacon strips in the distance, since they sprinted away for no other justifiable reason. The appearance of Sam Kinison in drag is an especially diabolical development for Ethan. This wall-stricken form is what Miranda looks like without her cocoa butter and TikTok filters, and our hapless hero nutted inside of her for months, never realizing that she was using her shape-shifting powers to transmogrify the inside of her pussy into a man's gritty, hairy, disgusting bunghole the entire time, thereby technically making Ethan a gay homosexual, which, as we all know, is the second worst sort of homosexual, right behind those small furry ones that live in trees and eat all the acorns that are rightfully mine. Subtle gameplay elements hint that Ethan must then collect 2 decorative NASCAR plates in order to enter the castle on the horizon. The first plate is conveniently left in a chapel, whereas I can only assume by all the photographs of sluts plastered to the wall that it was used as a target for Coombe. On his way to the slumber party, where the second plate may be found, Ethan accidentally stumbles upon the villager's first waifu bait in the shitting corner of her filthy studio apartment. Now, I hope I am not saying anything unbecoming of a dapper gentleman of my caliber, but this bitch's booty is so concave and unsmackable that I can honestly say that I have seen more hip on an opotamus. Her father, Leonardo, is nearly as beat up as I would leave his skank daughter's Punanarino, and he wields a machete as though in fear of being attacked by an especially surly coconut. Ethan hatches a masterful plan of hopping a fence to lead them to the relative safety of their neighbor's house, where the doorman Ulian draws a gun on Ethan, says he looks vaguely Italian, and that's close enough to black to cause a problem. Unfortunately, the owner of the home allows them inside. I mean, what kind of party has prayer, but not any slam pigs? No Mario Kart 64, and no Mountain Dew! For Christ's sake, Louise, the village is surrounded by mountains. Just send somebody out for Dew, or don't invite me next time. Leonardo then climbs on the ceiling and attacks the other guests with the machete. Just like a wolf? You know, I get that these creatures aren't literally werewolves, but at this point, Leonardo is acting less like a misanthrope-lycanthrope and more like the Ninja Turtle he's named after, and that includes nutting on the pizza while the rest of the gang is sleeping, then smirking knowingly when Raphael asks why his slice tastes so much like asparagus and shrimp. Fortunately, Alina turns the tables on her father by blasting him in the face in the hallway by the garage for a change. At this point, the home catches on fire, and since Ethan is too stupid to open the garage door, he and Elena drive Louise's car directly into a load-bearing wall, thereby proving that Ethan is an even bigger home wrecker than Miranda. And she drank goop like it was Go-Gurt. Just saying. After dropping a bony-ass wind chime and a dress-looking slut onto her relapsing dad, Ethan hides in an attic like Anne Frank, but with an infinitely more believable setup leading to it. After engaging in an unholy ritual, equivalent only to placing 2 quarters in a Chuck E. Cheese skee-ball machine, Ethan is finally on the path to the castle and the literal booty that lies therein. But not so fast, gamers. No! Seconds before Ethan can escape the tutorial, an autistic Van Helsing knockoff with a fetish for bolts and nuts covers Ethan with scrap metal and spooch before dragging him away to yet another gameplay interrupting plot espousing cutscene. Cloistered within her Eldritchian manor, Mother Miranda has gathered her 4 horse persons of the apocalypse for their weekly bad movies and Uno night. Ethan arrived uninvited and without bringing any overpriced microbrew beer that smells like balls. Therefore, he must die. Like a cabal of CIA agents who have cornered a young boy who offended the Clintons, they briefly debate who will get to murder their captive. Perhaps by having him shoot himself twice in the back of the head. Ethan is sent down to Goblin Town, where he is expected to be turned into fresh ground American beef, but is saved by his wrists, which have been hardened from years of backhanding his flat-bootied wife. Upon achieving this great escape, players then encounter perhaps the sexiest character in the history of the Resident Evil franchise. Ladies, prepare your wallets for a merchant who actually is our greatest ally for a change. Your meat wallets, that is. This quantum singularity of flesh and capitalism single-handedly caused the McFlurry to go extinct in Eastern Europe. Meatballs trade scary stories of him around the campfire at night, and Hispanic Jews refer to him as El Abominazione Grande. You, however, may refer to him as the Duke. After selling Ethan some reasonably priced goods and allowing him to shotgun toke off of a fine Cuban cigar, rolled between the hairy thighs of Fidel Castro himself, the Duke informs Ethan of the specifics pertaining to Castle Dimitrescu, also known as Castle Wolfen down my Kommunestein. Now, before we begin the deluge of disgusting jokes about the vampire girls, what their front butts probably smell like, and how I'd like to lose a pinky ring inside of the blonde one, let me grab a sock off of the floor and smear the following message off of my chest.
Is my mom turning into a black person?
In the movie store.
I'm about to bust.
Traditionally, dragons personify chaos. What with their interstitial nature of dwelling on the ground, flying up in the sky,
and swimming in the sea simultaneously. In her own way, Lady Dimitrescu is a dragon of chaos. What with her long, neck-clenching legs on the ground, dangling beef curtain-esque wings flapping around in the sky, and of course the effervescent stench of fish she left in her President Taft-sized bathtub full of literal gamer girl bathwater. Perhaps at one point in your life you've yearned to gaze into the sun's incandescent splendor. Of course, you couldn't bring yourself to do it, because having looked directly into the sun's radiance, you'd have certainly gone blind. Believe me when I tell you, I can scry a woman's every genitalatic detail with just one glance, though a grope or two at the bus stop also helps. In short, my anal assist is clear. Lady D's butthole is like a glittering sun that you can actually look directly into. In fact, were all tall women as charming as she, I wouldn't have to drink quite as heavily as I do whilst masturbating to the WNBA. Now, I'm not just saying that because she's the one woman in the world who would actually enjoy all that blood in my jizz, but also because she literally has 300 pounds of pussy and ass. As a refined scholar, I must admit, even though Alcina has had more meat inside of her than the secret room behind the sawmill, I would gladly eat her ass, like a grave worm working up north through a casket. And not just because she had Taco Bell earlier, and even a second-hand bean burrito is delish. Attemptive gamers may discern Lady D is a huge fan of the band The Offspring, since her daughters are literal pretty flies for a white guy. The idea of making love to a mound of anthropomorphized bugs may gross you out, but frankly, sex with the daughters Dimitrescu wouldn't be the first time my foreskin was covered in flies. Don't ask why unless you got a warrant. Please understand my plight. The protagonist of the novel,
with a confederacy of dunces,
was so obese that he had zero sex drive and could only ejaculate by thinking back to his childhood memories of playing with his currently deceased dog. He was so far removed from engaging a woman intimately that his only prostate palliation was in projecting a single moment of happiness that he could never recapture. In a way, you preverts who make goddesses of these appealing abstractions are no different than Ignatius, jerking off to representations of women rather than chasing down the real thing, holding her in your arms and whispering, "Darling, I love you," then feeling her sweet breath on your face as she screams and stabs you repeatedly in the chest with her car keys. Like the proverbial Japanese man who fell into a tank of industrial lubricant, giving your nut to the idea of a woman rather than a woman itself is a heavily lubricated Asian man. Wait, that's not it. Fuck, whatever. Sure, Alcina and her daughters represent alluring women in your mind's eyes, but they are merely digital representations. From there, it is not so far a jump for a man to think even lower and nut to representations of women. The brony phenomena is proof enough of that. Upon entering the castle, Ethan is immediately assaulted by a trans-exclusionary radical feminist who cries out for his man blood, despite the fact that, as a mold person, Ethan is technically full of hermaphroditical spores and hecking valid as a direct result. 3 mystery negresses swoop down on him like seagulls pouncing on a french fry, nestled perfectly between my buttock cheeks, oblivious to the snapped necks that await them. These embodiments of the phrase live, laugh, love drag our protagonist to Alcina's rumpus room, where she proceeds to drink his blood, complain that it's lacking in endochrome, and instructs the girls to not bother waking up Hillary for a sip. The girls then hang Ethan by his palms via conveniently placed meat hooks I can only assume were generally used for aging the occasional lutefisk or spiral ham. From this point forward, the player is free to creep around Dee's house, sniffing the chair cushions and patrolling thoughts at their leisure. Battling the sisters is a simple affair, not even requiring having to convince a police officer that they fell down the stairs and onto a pile of lit cigarettes. A little cold air and these mother buggers, who should have dressed in layers, get more of a full-bodied hard nip than Junko Ferrata. Wait, that's terrible, I'm sorry. Highlights of this segment of the game include realizing that this hot tub filled with blood is surrounded by wooden toilets for the refined debutante who enjoys bathing in the blood of children, whilst weirdos sit around her pooping in unison. Ethan discovering that not only does his right hand come off, but that it is also plug and play, and my favorite moment, when Dimitrescu trashes her own room after Miranda tells her not to kill Ethan, despite the fact that he murdered her daughters, nutted in her shampoo bottle, and spent about a week disguised as one of her shoes just so he could deep throat one of her elongated proboscis toes while she wasn't looking. After Ethan uncovers a knife so cool that even dead people want it, Lady D turns into a melted chicken parmigiana melted to a dragon's vagina. This literal bitch with wings insists that Ethan is the first man she's shown her true self to. This surprisingly intimate sentiment ought to have filled Ethan with a sort of willful exuberance I feel whenever a woman farts in front of me for the first time and I didn't have to pay extra for it, but Ethan being Ethan, he kills that skanko instead. This delectable crystallized mommy tummy and a literal baby bottle are his reward, but more on that in a moment.
Every night I turn myself into a werewolf.
Back in the city of Townsville, Miranda has once again disguised herself, this time as a former party girl who is finally ready to settle down. After Ethan complains that he almost died, Grandmother Miranda asks him, "How can a man be almost dead?" "Well, honey, it's a little thing I like to call post-nut lethargy, which is, of course, why I always take a nap after watching reruns of Saved by the Bell." "One day, you will be mine, Lisa Turtle. Then into the pit of woe with you." As a reward for killing the last white family in the neighborhood, thereby opening it up for government-subsidized Section 8 housing, Ethan is given the key to the city. This key is notable in that it was originally designed to be utilized by Chris Redfield. How do I know this? Well, this key can be upgraded to open multiple locks, yet only takes up one inventory slot. And who else but Chris is known to have little room for inventory in the tight pockets of his pleather pants. The fully upgraded version even includes the French tickler, Mon ami avec des petites boules. Following the aromatic bouquet of indulgent cold gravy and hot pocket farts, Ethan is reunited with his plumpest pal and porcine peddler, the Duke. This sarlacc pit of snacks reveals that Rose Winters has been crystallized, broken into 4 pieces, and then suspended in orange Fanta in order to preserve her navy. Ethan then immediately drops his baby on her head, which kind of explains why she appears to suffer from Asperger's later on in the prologue. Fortunately, the Duke possesses a hitherto unknown variety of shrimp-scented adhesive that he offers to hot glue Rose back together with, so long as Ethan can provide the remaining 3 flasks and then spit on the Duke's right palm. After encountering a new variety of enemy who wears a bucket on his head just like a wolf, then killing a chicken because it couldn't give me an egg, Ethan unlocks the gate to the graveyard and the quest for the next MacGuffin continues. Brief glimpses of his absent wife lure Ethan between a labyrinth of graves to a literal dollhouse where he is compelled to forfeit his memories of Mia and Rose in order to gain entry. Or, to put it another way, a duo of lying sluts who both require a fist up their ass to talk, lead Ethan by the nose to a secret basement where he trips balls for about 5 minutes. Spoiler alert, this entire segment of the game is an illusion brought on by Ethan's inhalation of black mold spores in a manner not at all dissimilar from what I once thought up as my idyllic childhood in the Belgian countryside, but with actually just a couple of hours I spent feverishly attacking the kitchen staff at an international house of pancakes with my flaccid penis after I imbibed a bucket of the finest Jenkins in the alleyway by their unlocked kitchen door. Though you must admit, it was kind of nice of Donna Bienvenido to let Ethan hallucinate the exact clues he required to solve her mind game puzzles. If I were the one manipulating Ethan with my red-hot psychedelic brappuccinos, I'd have driven him to suicide by making him think he was trapped in Resident Evil Revelations 2 instead. There, in the house of a woman so Italian that she keeps an emergency portion of spaghetti and meatballs embedded in her forehead, Ethan is confronted by a doll who wants him to stay with her forever, but doesn't even think to offer to let him see her butthole or go first when playing pox to entice him to stay. The primary puzzle of the dollhouse requires inspecting the lifelike texture of a titless Mia doll that only one person in the world has enjoyed. How do I know that one person actually enjoyed playing with this Mia doll? Well, I know that he thoroughly enjoyed the Mia doll because he left a film in her mouth. You don't get it. Jumping through a couple of metaphorical hoops activates the house's mood lighting, revealing a mottled tube of meat so long and stanky that it can only logically lead to the space between my own belly button and balls, or to the stomach of a monstrous fetus, which will yeet us and eat us. All too late do I understand the horror I've subjected boogers to my entire life. Back upstairs, Ethan plagiarizes Ted Bundy's courtship of several sorority girls in the 1970s by playing hide-and-go-stab-you in your head with the floating Angie doll. Once you jab a pair of scissors into Donna's prefrontal cortex, the true tragedy of Resident Evil Village unfurls, as the player realizes that they've murdered a big-tittied autistic girl who never talked and had her own home that they could have crashed in for free. Sure, she'd have forced me to watch Thomas the Tank Engine reruns with her for days at a time, but if my perfect waifu who I deprived of lifu were real, I'd have put a shoebox on my lap and given her a puppet show for a change. But such is the fleeting nature of amour. Ethan, like the Japanese woman who I pay $5 weekly to walk on my balls, then acquires 2 smelly little feet covered in goo. Completionists take note. If you can resist the Eldritchian urge to sniff Angie's panties before selling her to the Duke, a secret audio log can be played in Angie's model viewer window.
A minuscule thought, dressed in a dish rag, so close that her stench fills the air. You can smell her, I tell you. Somewhere between the pungent spice of vanilla and the bitter sweetness of peanut M&Ms. There are worlds beyond this one, worlds as we've never seen, nor can we. Our eyes do not open far enough. Try it. Try holding your eyes like a Chinaman pretending to be white. But you'll never, ever see how something can be so kawaii yet so alive and hungry. She lusts for flesh, human flesh, and feasts upon all the fig Newtons a man has to offer. Damn her thighs! We are blind to them. Oh, horrible, horrible things. We must purge them from our midst. Order them off Etsy. Dress them like anime characters. Hot glue them. It's the only way. I know. I've done it. It works.
It's worth noting that upon exiting House Ben Shapiro,
Creatures which appear to be first-year college feminists begin popping up from underground as though suddenly aware and furious that Ethan's privileges have gone unchecked, and the single attempt at this being an actual horror game comes to an end.
Would you like to make a wish?
The next area is covered in more vomitous green slime than Barber Chandler's panties, and introduces a four-legged Muppet, which will briefly distract players from the disgusting Calper's caviar that they will tread underfoot for the next hour of gameplay. Salvatore Moreau is built up to be the diabolical mastermind behind the village's werewolf infestation, but this literal "he who smelt it" turns out to be a rabbit-strangling mama's boy, and his lab is merely the bodily fluid-slathered basement where he occasionally shoves black babies up the bungholes of confused villagers and also himself.
That tickles.
When he and Ethan first cross paths, players catch Moreau on the squiggly lines between the pay-per-view channels, and Moreau pukes up more row after realizing the sloppy pussy he'd been jacking it to all day was just the reflection of his own mouth.
Holy mackerel!
At this point, Ethan can just grab the flask containing Rosa's arms, which I can only assume Moreau had been using to hold up his weird fish stick to make it look bigger when he sends unsolicited nudes to Elena, but Moreau refuses to let Ethan leave until he reads and critiques his erotic flipper fanfiction. Fortunately, much like myself in an elevator with a pregnant black woman, these great green globs of greasy, grimy Moro nut bust as soon as you brush up against them. To escape from this radon death trap, players require a boat key, as Ethan will willingly wade balls deep through congealing blood in Lady Dimitrescu's basement, but not that placid lake water that fish had put their gross naked butts in. Ew! Players must then repair the windmills Moreau utilizes to blow his repugnant nut vapors all over town in order to drain the, pardon my French, the darn, which separates our hero from freedom. And as Ethan engaged in a three-fingered zipline, which just so happens to be the name of a sex move I invented in college for consorting with three Asian girls at once,
Welcome to Japan.
I finally felt at one with my character avatar. And to be perfectly honest, with the way Moreau pulls off a perfect swan dive, he's not the only one going sploosh. Moreau is more like it. Halfway through this section, players catch back up to Chris, who still won't cut the shit with Ethan because of literally no good reason. Luckily, a red-hot case of bath to mouth splits them up and the gameplay resumes. Moreau bloats up from all the cheese wheels he's been eating and aerates the area with abhorrent anal ambergris. After this fish flops, players return to his room only to find that Moreau had been keeping a black baby in a jar in an endearing attempt to grow his own Sheva Alomar. Truly, he and I were kindred spirits.
Oh, we are going to have so much fun together when you and I are together.
The two-way CB radio in a 480p resolution tube television then kicks in, and Heisenberg offers Ethan a deal. The final flask is located in a werewolf den on the outskirts of town. All Ethan has to do to retrieve it is prove that he and the game's engine can handle more than 3 enemies in a room at a time. Unfortunately for Heisenberg, he, like the Jewish Godfather, made Ethan a deal he could not afford. Having retrieved his daughter's torso in a jar, Ethan is then invited to Heisenberg's place to play some Super Nintendo and drink hot cocoa. Little does Ethan know, however, that the only game Heisenberg has in mind is Kablooey, and the hot cocoa is just heated up milk with chocolate sundae toppings stirred into it, which isn't the same thing, motherfucker! Having completed the Lovecraftian ritual of placing all 4 rose flasks into the primeval mechanism, which appears to predate all other architecture in the game, Ethan is rewarded with the arcane access to a scrapyard full of old beer cans and Lady Dimitrescu's crushed butt plugs. It's a good thing Ethan brutally murdered those 3 bosses in their homes, or they might have used the 4 flasks themselves in order to Oh, I don't know, drop off their unwanted car batteries without him? The horror. The horror! With the chalice of rose andochrome in place, Ethan is now free to walk directly into an extremely obvious double cross. But don't read too much into this. All I'm saying is that Heisenberg seems like the kind of person who cries out in pain as he hammers you.
Oh, this is nice. This is the end. Okay. There's some things that are still unresolved here, guys.
There, in his office, which is also his bathroom, Heisenberg offers to use Rose as a weapon for killing Miranda. Take note, Heisenberg isn't all that bad, even though he's been murdering villagers to transform them into soulless automatons bent on destroying their former fellow men. He did build them a neat little Ferris wheel, which, as it turns out, is only the second deadliest known Ferris wheel, right after what happens whenever the guy who played Ferris Bueller gets behind the wheel of a car. Down the pizza cutter hallways and past the enemies who require red-hot nipple tweaks to kill, players can stumble upon Heisenberg's room and find out that Fagnito enjoyed experimenting with hairless farm boys, thereby turning these stable boys unstable? I especially enjoyed these ore-minding zombies with VR headsets, since I can only assume that, being typical virtual reality-loving degenerates, they have been tricked into thinking that they are actually mining through the diaper of a gigantic furry anime girl. This makes blowing their brains out all the sweeter. Now, certain people have complained that the mini-boss of this area was stolen from a certain previously existing design. So let's ponder this together for a moment. Sturm is a tortured monstrosity with a propeller embedded in his chest and is capable only of pushing others away. After months of research, would you like to know the true inspiration from which Sturm is derived? You guessed it, Frank Stallone. Heisenberg then digivolves into a gargantuan robot who specializes in jumping sharks. I know some of you at home are asking if this is any worse than Simmons turning into a man-bear pig, a T-Rex, and then into a fly at the end of Resident Evil 6. And frankly, oh god, it is so much worse, because Village was pretty good up until this point. I'm not saying that this Full Metal autist ruins the game, but it is definitely the lowest point of the narrative, right behind that moment when you realize that you can't actually pour the liquefied pieces of rose into your bunghole in order to experience the miracle of motherhood as you painfully shit her directly back into her crib like any loving father would. Before this showdown of Metal Gear Rising retardants can ensue, Chris reappears to finally reveal that Ethan was fucking an imposter who wasn't Mia, and even more importantly, wasn't Chris's sister Claire, who is single and doesn't smell nearly as bad as you'd think by looking at her. No wonder they didn't bother reading the fake Mia her Miranda rights, cause being Miranda, she already knew them. Chris was simply trying to protect Ethan, as involving an immortal who specializes in fighting this specific kind of mold monster might have proven dangerous. Fortunately, Chris also had surmised that the best way to further protect Ethan from danger is to send him directly up to the Mecha Schlobs the Knobzilla, while Chris stays behind to plant a small nuclear bomb directly below Ethan. Perfectly safe plan all around from what I can tell. Miranda then appears in the rubble of Heisenberg's remains, and instead of offering to let Ethan fuck her one last time while using that dipping tray mounted to the back of her head for scooping Tostitos into salsa with every thrust, she rips out Ethan's heart, just like a real wife would do after popping at a kid and instantly asking for a divorce. What the hell, Sharkweefa? I thought little Constipatia would bind us together, not tear us apart. The final level features Chris Redfield targeting distant tentacle monsters, furious that even they don't want to fuck his sister, going toe-to-toe with a Chalice Dungeon variant of that guy with the hammer, then tossing an N2 bomb at the gigantic black baby since he used up all of his regular N bombs while fighting the locals in Resident Evil 5. radio chatter, and last-second retcon notes reveal that Eveline from Resident Evil 7 was Miranda's failed attempt at bringing her own daughter Ava back from the dead. That Miranda used to shoot pool with the founders of Umbrella, and perhaps most disturbing of all, that someone dissected their own shit on this table because they didn't want their perfectly good corn to go to waste. Mia then stumbles out of a jail cell, revealing to Chris that she was experimented on with a terrible new form of torture called hot wifing. You can consult your mother for more details. Chris then tries to cheer up Mia by telling her that her husband is dead, but she laughs in his face, knowing that the following cutscene will explain Ethan's potent Marty Stew powers. Apparently, Ethan isn't just figuratively a fun guy, but also literally too. But hey, what's a little last-second existential crisis among family? Personally, I like to think that if this scene went on a little bit longer, that Eveline would have told Ethan that he and the four bosses all grew up in the same orphanage, but forgot about it due to equipping guardian forces. Ethan then respawns in the rear compartment of the Paul Blart Shark cart, realizing all too late that he was sleeping face down on the wet spot the entire time. In this final encounter, Miranda reveals that her daughter Ava perished from the Spanish flu because evil orange man Skrinald Plumph tricked her into not wearing 4 face masks simultaneously while walking alone in the woods. The poor girl's parting words were purported to be, "If only I had trusted all the science and taken my 7th booster shot, I could have lived." And after all the experimenting, torture, and outright murder that Miranda put the villagers through, her final attempt at reviving Ava failed miserably because Ava was never in the Megami site to begin with. Kind of an obvious oversight when you think about it.
Now go home and get your fucking shine box.
Perhaps this game's strongest suit is the full-on embracing of domestic violence. Custody battles are never easy, but this one against Murgo's wet pussy nurse is actually lots of fun. And considering the fact that the last boss I made love to, then killed, was Lupita at the Broken Glass Factory, this swan song of Resident Evil Village is like an ephemeral walk down memory lane. With the final blow dealt, Miranda, like all women after pumping out a baby, then becomes a useless pile of dirt. Ethan pawns off his daughter on Chris, knowing that, as a gay homosexual, he will never actually molest her, then fulfills his duty as a white man by killing the gigantic Megami site black baby before it can grow up and ruin basketball for those of us who like to watch the game out of an appreciation of the fundamentals. This endearing self-sacrifice to secure the escape of his family will forever mark Ethan as a martyr and a true hero. At least, that is, right up until he appears in the post-credit scene completely unharmed. Whoopsie! The true damage done, however, comes when players realize that the moment Mia became a single mother, she probably dyed her hair platinum blonde and put on about 30 pounds, which, now that I think about it with my pants around my ankles, is probably an improvement.
This game is not fun.
Concluding a campaign as carefully crafted as Resident Evil Villages, with a DLC as shamefully slapped together as Shadows of Rose, is equivalent to having spent the entire night pummeling your wraith-called bed with the gelatinous backside of a scrumptiously sumptuous strumpet, and just as you're about to roll over into your own glistening pool of asparagus-scented prostate precipitate, and fall into a deep contented slumber from which only an unexpected dog fart could possibly awaken you, you flip over your part-time lover and shit directly into her cunt instead. I know what you're thinking, my beloved viewer, whomst's belly I've longed to caress with the back of my knee, while we have all been tempted by our lesser demons to perform the forbidden erotic Choco Taco at one point in our lives. You're not actually supposed to do it, as that's where black babies come from. At least, that's where they originate, according to my sixth wife, who mysteriously disappeared along with our newborn son. His name, if I recall correctly, was
the entire starting lineup of the Jacksonville Jaguars Jr. While one may have expected this journey into the Mega Mythete hive mind to have included fan-favorite characters who perished in the main game, like Dana Penne Aliento, Big Titty Milky Mommy, please smush me with your feet, or perhaps even a surprise cameo from a long since retired character like Albert Wesker. Instead, this DLC focuses on Rose Winters, who had no characterization in the main game beyond her being a quest flag that craps his pants. Frankly, if we're going to go the Silent Hill 3 route of dealing with a teenage girl's puberty angst, why does this DLC take place in locations that Rose has never been to, rather than her school where she's bullied, the hiding place of her absent Mamma Mia, or perhaps the most glaringly omitted of all locations, my rumpus room so I can sniff her feet? There is a standard in writing called show, not tell. For example, I would never dare tell a group of fair mademoiselles huddled by the glass wall of a battered woman's shelter that I was about to flash them my succulent yam bag. I would simply show them my romantic intentions by flopping my penis across their faces like an AIDS-infested weasel of love instead. In Shadows of Rose, to effectively demonstrate that Rose misses her father, she wears the mold-slathered coat that Ethan died in. Much like how I'll sometimes don my sixth wife's favorite face mask, which, to the untrained eye, is often mistaken for a plastic bag, but I'll never forget how beautiful she looked wearing it the last time I saw her alive, screaming and trying to claw it from her face as the baby bottle of malt liquor she had just warmed up in the microwave rolled over and spilled onto the dirt floor of the shed I was keeping her in. Just give me a second. I'm sad. Now, did you catch what I just did? And by you, I mean the viewers, not the police. Nothing in this video can be used against me because I said it in a funny voice, thereby making it inadmissible in a court of law. It worked for Bill Cosby, and it'll work for me too, goddanggit. No, what I just did was contrast a sophisticated emotional response to trauma, which I have suffered after losing my sixth wife, her son, and 3 bags of my favorite limestone in one traumatic outing, with simply stating, hey fucker, I'm sad. I mention this because Shadows of Rose tells the player that Rose's powers are disgusting and not necessarily beneficial, but doesn't actually bother to show us why. If Rose shape-shifted into a hurtful anti-Semitic stereotype every time she sneezed or accidentally transformed a couple of her classmates into black mold monsters after they bullied her, thereby making her the first fatherless white girl to black somebody else for a change, then the player may have actually had a reason to care about Rose's quest to become a basic bitch. Unfortunately, the entire premise of this DLC hinges on Rose's hatred for her powers, and her motivation is flimsier than the structural integrity of these putrid period blood walls that I kinda wanna dip Tostitos in. At the outset of Shadows of Rose, also known in some circles as Amnesia, the Dark Descent into Mediocrity, a mysterious figure lures Rose into his laboratory, promising her that she can remove her unwanted mold powers. Supposedly, the only records of Miranda's research into Rose's powers are contained within the hive mind of sentient mold known as the Mega Mythete, which Rose can only access via the arcane ritual of Touch Crystal Get Dizzy. Rose then dreams of a subterranean dungeon, which one could argue symbolizes Rose's descent into her subconscious, but actually represents the game developer's devious desire to avoid rendering new assets. After a brief run-in with her own clone, festooned in its best Gregorian monk drip, some older and busted clones of Rose appear and start sucking the life out of the younger Rose clone so that they too can become feminists. Now, mayhaps if I have fallen out of touch with modern gaming, for real, no cap. Back in my day, after all, bustin' was just something we did inside of fat women's, whether they wanted us to do it or not. but the events which follow this tightly paced introduction are so underwhelming from both a narrative and gameplay perspective that I can best summarize the quality of Shadow the Rose by smacking myself on the nutsack with a wooden spoon so softly that it doesn't even make me shoot my spoony kumis. I suspect that the writers did not know what to do with Rose as a character, and the set pieces she navigates come off as generic as a result. They went full retard with these overt visual metaphors, but forgot that they're supposed to be based on somebody's personal trauma. Rose has no reason to visit Castle Dimitrescu. The dioramas begging to be Hawkloot and House Dan Marino are a lazy cop-out from rendering a high school level, and Ava at the end of the dollhouse level has an abandonment complex to which her level has no connection. In fact, the only trauma voraciously on display in this DLC is my own personal suffering from having played it. The title, Shadows of Rose, implies that the player will uncover Rose's shadow, perhaps her shadow self in the Jungian sense. Carl Jung supposited that the aspects of an individual that they reject, despite possessing, creates a sort of secret self or shadow self that only the individual can truly know. This shadow self could come in the form of a policeman who breaks the law, a fitness expert who binge eats in private, or a video game reviewer who is secretly terrible at video games. However, when it comes to Rose Winter's shadow, my flaccid pecker casts a longer shadow on a cloudy day. Think of it this way: Shadow the Rose throws dozens of Rose clone zombies at you, which are never particularly scary or compelling to interact with beyond the initial reveal at the outset of this DLC. Had the DLC included a single Rose clone instead, her gradual transformation into a zombified husk would have actually had an emotional impact. And fittingly, Miranda's desire to recreate her own daughter would have caused her to create this clone of Rose as a surrogate only to destroy her. This Shadow of Rose could have embodied all of Rose's fears, doubts, and personality flaws. Instead, these mass-produced clones only serve to represent the developer's desire to artificially extend the length of this DLC. They lacked the courage to release an hour-long powerhouse of an epilogue like Resident Evil 7's End of Zoe, and we are stuck with this shit heap, which is more padded out than the review you are currently watching. Furthermore, the entire premise of the DLC is flawed. The Chinese knockoff of the Duke tortures Rose clones in hopes of forcing them to manifest megamycete powers. The endgame of this is to provide a copy of Rose viable for transmogrifying into a reborn Ava. However, the main campaign proves that this is impossible due to Eva never joining the megamycete in the first place. Miranda's characterization has regressed to a state from before her defeat at the end of the main game, whereas she was once a desperate woman mourning the loss of her daughter and grabbing at her last hope, no matter how slight. She is now evil for the sake of being evil, and she doesn't even offer to breastfeed Rose one last time for old time's sake. And after spending half of the dollhouse level being chased by Mia dolls who plainly have morning wood, is a little mother love too much to ask for, Capcom? Miranda literally weaned Rose, revealing that her intention is to actually adopt Rose as a surrogate daughter at the end would have been more interesting. Instead, Miranda does a backflip, is slapped by Rose's last-second Devil May Cry powers, and dies again instead. I just don't get it, Capcom. How are you this lazy? I get that Rose yearns to leave the megamycete hive soul in order to join the soulless modern female hive mind, but no amount of likes on TikTok are worth putting out a DLC this lousy. Rose Winters is a drop-dead gorgeous 10 out of 10 piece of please lock me up, I don't even care anymore bait, who is inexplicably unpopular at her school, probably because she hasn't figured out that she could become popular simply by bottling and selling her farts. As a result, I just plain don't buy into her suffering. Any girl that pretty and that devoid of a father figure would have been extremely popular at my high school. Hell, Being that her name is Rose, she even has a literal rosy palm. Now, that's not to say that this is all bad all the time. The subtle touches are there. Unfortunately, they are grossly overshadowed by the generic horseshit, which is so patently rubbed into your face, it may as well have been my yam bag the next time you're sleeping. On the positive side, I can appreciate how Capcom enabled sensitive gamers like myself to surmise that it is Ethan contacting Rose from the start, as once these mystical glowing text messages begin to appear, anyone other than Ethan sending a cutie pie like Rose untraceable text messages would have had the moral obligation to send her some unsolicited dick pictures as well. The dollhouse begins with an apt visual metaphor to Rose's buried childhood, demonstrates Rose's lack of social skills as she passes beneath these dangling hands, just begging to be high-fived, but ultimately left hanging limply like my nuts on a hot summer's day. The level set in Rose's childhood home alludes to, but never actually reveals, the unspeakable horror of Rose possibly uncovering her dad's Google history. This dangling prolapse that queefs out Rose clones reminded me that I had to pick up my mama from the airport, and perhaps most sophisticated of all, the revelation that Evelyn persists within the Megamycete and is jealous that no one joined her Second Life instance in the hive mind, save for that fish guy who kept asking to lick her feet, was somewhat wholesome. Ethan's appearance, the final fight, and the resolution are exceedingly lackluster. The reveal that Kay was an illusion and that everything happened in Rose's head directly contradicts her awakening with her father's wedding band clutched in her palm, unless, of course, it had somehow been embedded inside of Rose when she was an infant, in which case Ethan belongs in jail. A lazily recycled ending from the main game ensues, which doesn't even go further than the original cutscene. In my opinion, which is also a fact, this DLC should have had an option for Rose to side with Miranda and take Ava's place properly. Not only would a second ending have provided replay value, it could have also been the result of copying the mechanic in Silent Hill Homecoming, where the player could choose to punish or forgive certain characters.
I did not hit her.
Overall, if I had to compare Shadows of Rose to another Capcom horror game, I would say that it is a little bit like that flawed gem, Haunting Ground, but only in so much that there's a fat retard drooling over the protagonist, although in this case, it's me. Now, before we conclude like a homosexual at an orgy of Jim Varney impersonators, by finishing in earnest, I would like to thank you all for joining me today. I know that I haven't been uploading as much as any of us would like, but keep in mind, that's because I am incredibly lazy. No wait, that's not it. I wanted to end this oversized diatribe by saying how grateful I am for all of you who stuck it through the long wait between reviews, and for the new guys who showed up for the vampire horror jokes. Be a pal and share this video with your buddies. Toss a penny at me on Patreon so I can afford to commission some more big-need Lady Dimitrescu fan art, or maybe even check out one of my novels. Read all 3 and your brain will grow so big that you'll probably die. And that being the case, you wouldn't have to suffer by playing Shadows of Rose, baby. All the pertinent links are provided in the description below. Until next time, thanks for everything, and goodbye!
Resident Evil Gaiden is the most horrific thing to come out of a pocket since Nestle launched their Hillary Clinton's vagina flavored Hot Pocket in the summer of 1997. In this metaphorical genital wart on the booty hole of the Resident Evil franchise, you'll play as Barry Burton, who is so hurtin' for a squirtin' that he has broken onto a doomed cruise ship in order to squeeze some cheese out of these diseased titties, then punch some Rastafarian cunch named Lucia in her pussy. Enemies include zombies with a stick, and a handful of ooga booga butthole belly boys who want to give you a bit of the old-fashioned tentacle rape that Mama used to opine about during Sunday dinners. Gameplay consists of killing enemies in hopes of finding the keys that you'll need 2 hours later, and if you miss a single one of, you are completely fucked, as well as staring at your own reflection in the screen and wondering what the fuck you're doing with your life. There's an incredibly vague side plot about a little orphan girl with a tribble lodged in her shitter, but fortunately, this poorly performing portable precursor to Dead Aim is completely non-canon because the developers accidentally made Barry a circus clown dicked ginger abomination and Leon a half-melted Chucky doll who is also a secret Jew, so who even cares at this point? Well, hey everybody, it's your good old pal EmptyHero, and today, because Capcom just can't say no to a Western developer with a mediocre pitch, we're going to discuss the squad-based third-person shooter that no one is talking about, Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. Insightful players will note that this unsolicited SOCOM-styled spin-off is appropriately named, as it takes place in the most dangerous coon-themed city since Camden, New Jersey. And, as with most operations, players will require anesthesia to proceed. This $1 tier humble bundle bait abandonware Games for Windows Live only online multiplayer based interquel occurs during the events of the second and third Resident Evil games, and includes bastardized versions of their locations, characters, and events, while adding absolutely nothing iconic of its own. Contrarian troublemakers could try to argue that the addition of 4-person multiplayer adds a new dimension to the formula, but frankly, games like Left 4 Dead and Resident Evil Outbreak did it better, and the online community for RE Orc is deader than my chances of getting a second date with Syphilidia after she caught my dad and me shotgun blasting hot mustardy farts down the throat of her newborn baby son Turquillion, which, in our defense, was for the little bastard's own good. That ashy hogger of what should have been my free supply of mentholated mammy milk kept on yawning, and my pappy and I were trying to teach him to keep his mouth shut, lest John Podesta materialize from the dimension of woe, and slide his dangly retard nuts into that supple, toothless mouth. The kid's, not mine. In this, Spec Ops, the line leading right out the fucking door, players assume the role of one of Umbrella's Secret Service Delta team's 6 completely interchangeable paintball enthusiasts, whose personalities range from stereotypical brooding edgelord to stereotypical brooding edgelord, but with tits. In yet another complete waste of a great Resident Evil premise, players will then lead a wet work team on loan from the Clinton Suicide Assistance Squad, composed of 3 of the other options the player didn't want to personally play as, on a mission to assassinate survivors, destroy all evidence that implicates Umbrella, and sabotage Raccoon City's infrastructure faster than if it elected a black Democrat mayor. However, instead of tactical squad-based clearings of iconic locations like the Raccoon City Police Department, successfully cornering and eliminating targets like Nikolai Zinoviev, or activating the self-destruct mechanisms of Umbrella's labs, players will mow down endless waves of brainless zombies, half of whom must have become infected by the T-virus during a gathering for Halter Top and Pete Rose haircut fetishists, and occasionally corner a character from one of the numbered Resident Evil games, but fail to kill them in order to avoid conflicting with the canon or allowing the player to have any actual fun. Because the protagonists have to be interchangeable, yet adhere to identical actions, they have almost no unique characterizations beyond the slightly different things they enjoy brooding about, and since the characters borrowed from earlier games scale from complete bastardizations like the new, batshit crazy version of Nikolai who converts zombies to Islam just to fuck with you and can snipe a helicopter pilot in mid-flight, but not shoot you while you stand directly below him, to bland nothing burgers like Claire, better dead than Redfield, who say and do as little as possible in order to avoid creating continuity errors. The writing of Operation Raccoon City comes off as nonsensical garbage on the level of a mid-series anime filler arc. I was actually kinda disappointed that the main campaign didn't end with Leon Kennedy peering back at the Wolfpack while the subway train drove him away to safety and whispering to Claire,
Let's never talk of those idiots again, as she kneels and tries to grab him by the hog before he sharply reminds her of his newly found incurable infection of yellow fever. Gameplay-wise, modern Resident Evil games tend to shit the bed the moment enemies with guns appear, and in Operation Raccoon City, you open the first door to the first room and are instantly forced into a mandatory cover-based shooting segment where you cannot proceed until every enemy is killed. This wouldn't be so bad if you could order your team tactically, swap between different characters to take advantage of their specialized roles, or if the AI had enough sense to properly flank and provide cover fire. Unfortunately, literally no one in the world is playing this game, and the AI on both sides of the firefights is abysmal. AI partners will not only walk directly into your line of fire, but also into literal lines of fire. And since Capcom never advertised this game or ported its multiplayer from Games Through Windows Live to Steam, most players will be forced to play alone, which at level 1 boils down to crouching behind cover and taking more blind shots than Stevie Wonder at a bar. Progressing through levels allows players to unlock the sort of cooldown timer-based bonus abilities you'd normally find in a shitty pay-to-win iPad game, but since only non-AI controlled characters can use them, you'll be stuck with a level 1 team from beginning to end. As a result, the different classes of your team are useless, and the medic will shotgun life-giving green herb into your face less often than a Jamaican girlfriend. Slant 6's attempts to include noteworthy events from Resident Evil 2 and 3 include the initial confrontation with Birkin that leads to the outbreak, Nemesis blowing up Jill's evac helicopter in front of the clock tower, and the gigantic fucking laser gun used to kill a bunch of Mr. X's. But with the exception of that final example, which only occurs in the slightly superior Echo 6 DLC campaign, most of those events either occur off-screen, in a cutscene, or are completely inconclusive. For example, you are tasked with temporarily stunning, reprogramming, and escaping from the Nemesis. But ultimately, these confrontations boil down to performing a laundry list of scripted events, and occasionally those scripts break. I wasted a good 10 minutes of my life that I could have spent making erotic source filmmaker art of Ada Wong stomping on kittens, while trying to figure out why this gigantic Down syndrome burn victim in Centobite clothes was just standing around with his dick hanging out, as we all do from time to time, until I realized that I had failed to ignite the prerequisite amount of superfluous exploding barrels, and even though the final barrel was nowhere near the Nemesis, blowing it up would cause him to react as though hurt, and the fight could finally proceed. Every time this poorly rendered brick made of compressed scrotums appears, you are supposed to either use explosive barrels to slow him down, or try to kill him outright. But running directly to the exit has no downsides, and the few times you're actually forced to fight Birkin, he just says nope, and jumps through a hole he busts in the floor faster than me when a police siren sounds in the distance on the 1st of the month when child support is due. And half of the time when a Mr. X appears, you can literally just run past it. Regular enemies include Spec Ops squads that can take more bullets to the ass and survive than a newly come out of the closet 50 Cent who's broken into an anal vibrator factory. Skinless jerks that specialize in licking because you've kicked them 67 times in the dick, the scariest hordes of red-headed monstrosities since the Irish, hunters with near infinite health, and soulless headcrab knockoffs. Occasionally, a precision zombie bite to the knob will turn a teammate undead, and they'll run around in circles with their arms held out, like a lonely black boy looking for someone to hug on Father's Day. This generally ends with that character being decapitated by another teammate, then revived from a pile of giblets by the player. This mechanic is supposed to be balanced by antiviral sprays and partially infected players taking reduced damage. But since no one plays this game and AI partners refuse to pick up items, it generally boils down to either saving the infected yourself or headshotting the poor fuck while they're still alive to skip the zombie phase altogether. Just picking up items is a hassle in general since you have to look down at them to activate the button prompt, and an intolerable amount of grenades will fly about as far as if you try to launch them at enemies with a blast of asparagus piss.
The 2 Echo 6 DLC campaign packs are slightly better than the main campaign, and are usually bundled with the game when it goes on sale for $1. In them, you play as a crew of Team Fortress 2 Chinese knockoffs that play identically to the USS Wolfpack. Their goal, besides getting to the live-action role-players convention on time, is to support the Spec Ops squads, restart Raccoon City's utilities, and rescue Sherry Birkin from Umbrella as they've played Resident Evil 6 and know that she grows up to be a delicious thought. And frankly, if I wanted to defend a white girl from hordes of mindless monstrosities covered in raw sewage, I'd have taken that job as Melania Trump's bodyguard for her African tour. These missions are somewhat less of a clusterfuck than the main campaign, and do a much better job of integrating boss characters into the missions. Though, for some reason, Jill now looks scarier than the zombies, and Carlos's face seems to have been designed using the character creator engine from the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Overall, Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City isn't a terrible game, it just is not meant for single player, and the online component is more abandoned than my oldest son at the Mexican border after I caught him wearing some of the high heels from the bag of incriminating evidence I keep by the incinerator. It's less of an embarrassment than Resident Evil 6 and Umbrella Corps, and despite its sloppiness and glaring flaws, Orc could have been a pretty fun 4-player game if it were actually possible to convince 3 other people to play it with you. Though, you'd probably have more luck getting someone to willingly join the back end of your human centipede on Taco Tuesday. Well, that's it for today's video. If you liked it, you can subscribe, tell a friend about it. If you don't have any friends, you can break into other people's houses and bookmark this video on their computers instead. Or use the links provided in the description of this video to join my Discord so that you too can post ironic memes at 3 o'clock in the morning. Check out one of my original ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks. Toss $1 at me on Patreon for the right to vote on which game I'll make my next video essay about. Or you can do none of those things and pray that God forgives you, because I certainly will not. Until then, thanks for your time and goodbye! Umbrella Corps is the worst thing to happen ever. In theory, a game about revisiting the iconic locations of previous Resident Evil games and cleaning up the rogue bioorganic weapons should have been amazing. In practice, Umbrella Corps felt so much like a soulless iPad game that I kept expecting to have to spend $1 to remove a cooldown timer between levels. Although to be fair, the player is treated to a different sort of cooldown due to the preposterous load times. I found these somber moments spent staring at my own magnificent reflection in the monitor most bearable when I imagined a gigantic butt shitting out the level I was about to play. Umbrella Corps' single-player campaign is a threadbare tutorial for the online multiplayer mode that not a single person in the world wants to play. I checked the Steam Spy stats after completely striking out in matchmaking on a Friday night, and sure enough, I was one of only 7 people in the world playing Umbrella Corps. Statistically speaking, more people get raped by dolphins each year than play Umbrella Corps, and are probably better off for it. In the offline campaign, the player can either hunt for DNA like a 37-year-old woman holding on to her last viable egg via the power of full-bodied kegels, collect a bunch of briefcases that have no specific purpose, or play a bastardized version of King of the Hill until an enemy spawns in your blind spot at the last possible second and instantly kills you. Enemies spawn from the corpses of other enemies you've killed, and the protagonist dies in just 2 hits. And for the record, even an unborn baby can take more hits than that. Believe me, I've checked. Corpse is one of those games where the keyboard controls are so poorly plotted that your pinky finger will cramp up like an elderly shrimp, and playing with a gamepad is substantially more convenient. The third-person camera is so close to the protagonist that it's effectively a first-person camera with some shithead blocking the entire left corner of the screen, a pointless cover mechanic intended for the dead online-only multiplayer tries to get you to rub up against every surface in front of you like a horned up penny licker. And as I progressed through the retro levels of Umbrella Corps, I thought less of, I wonder what they'll do next, and more like, I wonder how they'll fuck this one up. To that end, they took the village levels from Resident Evil 4 and 5 and completely stripped them of player interaction. No longer can enemies climb ladders or toss their weapons at you, and the protagonist for his part can't shoot explosive barrels, drop electrical transformers on enemies' heads, or alter the environment in any form other than by opening doors. I will, however, admit that Umbrella Corps is fairly tense, but not the good kind of tense you might expect from a horror game. Corpse is more of the, oh my god, I need to sneeze, but I've been holding in a boiling hot liquid cabbage shit all day, and this is my last fancy pair of corduroy pants. Though, in a strange way, completing a level in Corpse is identically as satisfying as filling your underoos with runny poos. Overall, Umbrella Corps was neither fun, scary, nor entertaining. It just exists in a suspended state, like the Terry Schiavo of Resident Evil games. In a way, it's fitting that the shortened version of this game's title is U-Corpse, because when playing it, you would probably rather be a corpse too.